Okay, I think we're on. Welcome. Welcome to the live stream for October 5th, 2016. My name is Dana, for those of you who don't know me. And let's see. Okay, just getting onto YouTube here. So, how is everybody doing? Anything new and exciting going on? M. Fisher is here. Hiya. It's been a while. How you been? Dear Bliss is here. A is here. Good morning. He says, good morning. You must be far away from me if it's morning your time. Latarsha, if I'm saying that correctly, is here. Hello. Allison, Christine, Cynthia, Cecilia. Hey, Cecilia. Tiara, Sylvie, Doug. Hey, Doug. Lots of people are here tonight. Ray, Lynn, Regina. Lots of people. We have so much to talk about tonight. I have just so much stuff. So while everybody is getting settled in, I was talking to a friend of mine last night. His name's Ryan. He's probably going to be here later. Hi, Robert. Robert says, I love your videos. You've helped me so much. That's so awesome. I'm really glad. Thank you. Postmodern's here. Hey. So here's where I'm stuck. And I could use some clarity. So I was talking to my friend Ryan last night. He actually just started his own YouTube channel called Ryan Liberty. If you guys want to go check that out, it's interesting. But oh, and Cecilia said she posted a vlog today. Very cool. And so I was talking to Ryan, and he was saying he's going to be helping me out with some podcasting, because I've had quite a few people ask me to either turn my videos into a podcast or to just start a podcast. And oh, Postmodern says, uh-oh, the volume is way down. It shouldn't be. Is this better? My little tiny microphone, I feel like a giant. I kind of wonder if it has something to do with where I'm clipping the microphone, because the volume shouldn't be. That's better. Okay. Let's see. Where can I clip this? Let me see if I clip it up higher. Cecilia says that looks so pro. I know it does. It does, right? But it's not. So, let me see if I clip it there. Does that work better? Hey, Dave. Okay, maybe I'll try to talk louder. We'll see if that works. Okay, good. It's sounding better. Okay, good deal. So we were talking about a podcast, and so here are my thoughts. I was thinking about, and I would really like you guys' feedback. So, what do you think if I were to do a podcast that, or I guess what I'm asking is, what would you like to see? Would you like to see a podcast that's question and answer, just like an advice type podcast, where people can either maybe leave? There's like a thing I can put on my website where people leave a message. Like they can leave a question, like a voicemail is what it is. Like they can leave a voicemail on my website, and then I can play that, or they can email in a question, and then I can answer it on the show. So that's one option, to do it that way. So to have a podcast that's question and answer, Or we could do a podcast, because what I would like to do is down the road, I'd like to be able to interview like a wide range of people. I'd like to be able to interview other survivors of abuse. I'd like to be able to interview authors of different books, and just kind of provide a lot of different like perspectives and resources and information out there, I guess is what I'm saying. So would you like to see, if I were to go that route, I guess, which would you prefer? And do you think that that could be done all within like one podcast? Or would I do it in two podcasts? So like have one that is just like have one that's just like a regular like a one that's like a quote unquote Dear Dana type podcast, like Dear Abby, but like Dear Dana, right? So it's just question and answer, and then have the interviews and the book reviews and the book discussions and all the rest of the stuff in a different podcast. Maybe we could call that one just like the Thrive After Abuse podcast. So I don't know. It's would you like to see all of that in one podcast or in two? I guess is a good place to start. Oh, Heather's having trouble hearing me. Lots of people are having trouble hearing me. Let me see what I can I can unclip the world's smallest microphone, and then I can feel like a giant and I can talk into it like that. Dave is saying, question and answer would be good. Voicemail idea rocks. Interview is awesome. Maybe some of it or all of it. Variety, or even do segments to appeal to more people. Yeah. Well, I have a lot of videos that I could go ahead and turn into podcasts. So I Wendy says to take my microphone and clip it to my hair. That just seems like a really, I'm going to try it for the sake of science and posterity, but I do not think this is going to work, for the record. I don't even, I could clip it to my lip. If I had like a lip piercing, maybe I could do that. So I was thinking about, people were asking like, how often would this podcast be? I'd like to get to the place where it's 7 days a week, but keep in mind too that I can record videos, or podcasts on like Saturday. So I could do multiple ones, I could set them up for it's like that afternoon. That's when I record them and then put them out throughout the week. So I'm not doing a podcast every single day. At least not now while I'm working full time, because that would be too much. But yeah, I'm just so interested in all of this. I don't know. It's so interesting. I'm kind of reading and writing and discussing all this stuff anyhow. I kind of feel like it might as well be a podcast for those who are interested in it. So, and here's the other thing, okay? And then we'll kind of get into answering some questions here. But what do you think of the names for a podcast? I'm making myself crazy going round and round trying to get clarity as far as how to proceed with this. And I guess it's more of the fear of making a mistake. But at the same time, I know it's going to be a learning curve, right? Like all of this is a learning curve. So yeah, Doug, I take a lot of time to try to position the Buddha board so you can see it. Because I know you like it. That's a good point. Aqua says you can always change your name down the road. Dave says, don't be fearful. Your material is so healing for so many. Well, thank you, Dave. Oh my gosh, no joke. Viva says, what a thriver experience is listening to the radio on my way to work and how songs have different meanings now after being in an abusive relationship with a narcissist. Completely. Isn't that really wild when your eyes are open to it? And you're going to, if you start, you're going to start seeing movies in a different light too, which is really, like, oh my gosh, really, really eye opening. Okay, so real quick, we'll just take a quick poll here, and then we'll get on to you guys' questions. So you're thinking I should do like a question and answer show, and could I do? Hey Ryan, we're just talking about podcast stuff. So question and answer show, and call that one Dear Dana, and then do the interviews, the book reviews, everything else, and call that one Thrive After Abuse. Or do it all under Thrive After Abuse. Because I really would like to to do videos for questions and answers like 7 days a week. And I have a gal who is working feverishly on splitting up my live stream videos into shorter videos. So they're going to be a series, but pretty much what she's on course to do right now is each live stream is going to be split up into about like a lot, like 30 to 40 smaller videos for people. So, and it's going to be both. We're going to keep the live stream format for those who like to listen to all 3+ hours of it. If you're cleaning your house or you've got a long drive to work or, kind of whatever the situation is. But then people that also want specific topics and they don't want to listen to all 3 hours, which I totally get that, then they can listen topic by topic. So then we'll break them up into smaller videos. She's also working on doing a timestamp for each of the live streams. So it'll break it down subject by subject for people that want to watch the live stream all 3 hours, but they also might want to skip around during it. So, okay. Yeah, A says, I think releasing bi-weekly videos and splitting up the content into bite-sized portions, a bit like the hashtag CU podcast. Okay, I'll check that out. I haven't heard of that, but I will check it out. Aqua says, well, what if the umbrella show was Thrive After Abuse, and then you could have 3 or 4 Dear Danas per week? That is actually a really good idea. I could do that. So I could have like you're right. Like you're right. So I could have episodes during the week that are just Dear Dana episodes, which are just question and answer. So that the podcast could just be a Thrive After Abuse thing. Valenta says, yeah, I remembered you used to do the Ask a Question show, and that was good. Yeah, I did used to do that show, and I really liked doing it. But then because I was getting so many questions, and it was just I just got to the place where I couldn't get back to people individually like that. So that's when I started doing these live streams, and that's when I started doing the support groups. So people, in an effort to kind of get people the clarity and the validation and the support they needed. And plus it helps, like I'm just one person with one perspective, and it really does help to get a wide variety of perspectives from people that have been there, done that. So that was kind of why I ended that show and then moved it more towards the support group and the live streams. But I think, doing a question and answer show is still fun. And then we can continue the discussion of that, in the support groups or whatever. So I still think doing a podcast version of it, I think some people do, there is still kind of a demand for that. So I don't know. We'll see. Let's see here. Let me scroll up and get some questions because I saw quite a few good ones go by as I was talking. So Eric is talking about his mother, sister, and brother are narcissists, and he believes that they are being created through different types of abuse. So generally, yes, it's thought that most narcissists tend to be created in one of two ways, generally through trauma. So generally through some type of abuse or neglect as a child, and that's kind of their defense mechanism, and they form their personality around that defense mechanism. So which to me makes total sense. So the book that we read a few months ago, it's called Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker. If you go to my website, if you go to, which is thriveafterabuse.com, go to book club, and you'll see the book club notes for that book. And it explains in depth about the different kind of defense mechanisms that people develop and how they develop them through trauma. Really interesting stuff. And so it's kind of thought that, okay, so narcissism, the core of that is the fight response. So we have different defense mechanisms like fight or flight, which you guys have probably heard of. And then there's some other ones called fawn, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And so the fawn personality style tends to be more of the codependent style. So in order to survive a traumatic childhood, and I should just add here, it doesn't have to be traumatic in the sense of extreme abuse. It can be, more on like the covert, mild end of abuse, like abuse or neglect. So if a child's if they're not getting their emotional needs met or physical needs met by their parent, they're going to have to figure out a way to get those needs met. And so if they develop more of that fawn personality style, that's more of the people pleasing. So they go to great lengths to kind of keep the peace, to go along for the sake of getting along. It's this continual kind of, self-sacrificing. It's all about other people. It's never about them. And so then the opposite side of that, so a person, if their core, if they kind of get stuck in that fight defense mechanism, then it creates this attitude. Their way of surviving their environment is this creating that fight defense, which is like a me versus you defense. It's that very primitive fight mechanism that we all have. So we all have these different defense mechanisms within us. It's part of being not only a human, but kind of being an animal in general. So all animals have these. And so this is why, we all have some of these different character traits of both codependency and to some degree, even narcissism within ourselves. And what makes this behavior problematic, it isn't necessarily the behavior itself, although that can be incredibly problematic, don't get me wrong. But what's problematic is if a person is stuck there and they're not either willing or able to do anything different. And it's hard to get somebody to kind of wake up to the fact that there's a problem. So sort of like with alcoholics, like an alcoholic or an addict, they have to hit rock bottom. They have to experience enough pain in order to be motivated to move forward and change. But it's harder when it's our personality, because there's not such a direct correlation between cause and effect. Whereas like an alcoholic, they might drink and then they lose their job or their spouse or they get a DUI. So it's more cause and effect. Like the pain I'm experiencing is being caused by my alcoholism. For a codependent person, so the challenges that a codependent person would have in all of this is their traits, our traits. I don't want to speak for you guys, but I know for me, like a lot of my traits that I thought were really good traits, it's kind of, slid under the radar Because I was like, well, no, I didn't do anything wrong. I was very kind and compassionate and caring and giving. And I just gave and gave and gave. And I gave second and 20-second chances. And I just bent over backwards to try to make things work. And, you know, twisting myself inside and out to make something work. And that's problematic. So if you're in a dynamic where you're sinking yourself to save somebody else, that's a problem. And that's a codependent relationship in a nutshell, really is what that is. And so codependents tend to not have enough of that fight mechanism within themselves. They've lost that. So their defense is fawn. It's being people pleasing to such an extent that they're not able to defend themselves. Like they just give and they give and they give until they have nothing left to give. Narcissists, it's the opposite. So, you know, they don't tend to see that they have a problem because they don't tend to experience a lot of pain from their actions because they tend to not really have a lot of empathy or remorse. It tends to be all about them, and they don't see oftentimes the cause and effect of their actions because in their mind, it's everybody else has the problem. And a lot of that comes from that mentality of me versus you. So if a person's always locked in that dynamic of I have to be right and you have to be wrong, they're constantly in that attitude of competition, then it's really hard to get through to them because no matter what you say, they have to make you wrong in order for them to be right. So I think to me, that book just made so much make sense. And when you think about a person's behavior in that kind of context, and you realize it's not, then you kind of realize how challenging change can really be because you're not just talking about stopping a behavior. It's not just, well, I'm going to stop being abusive. Because you're not talking about stopping a behavior, you're basically talking about disabling a defense mechanism, which that's a real big challenge. And it's even a challenge for codependent people. So if you go to CODA groups, which those are worldwide, they're free. It's like Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's for Codependents Anonymous, if you're interested in any of those groups. And it's the same kind of ongoing realizations where people are like talking about healthy boundaries, talking about putting themselves first, dealing with a lot of kind of these realizations of, oh my gosh, I never realized that all of this good behavior that I had was actually really problematic. And it tends to be this ongoing process of aha moments and awakenings and continual readjustments. So it would be like the same thing, you know, just like a narcissist, you can't say, well, you just need to put me first. Like that's not that simple if that person's locked in that defense mechanism. It would be the same thing telling a codependent person, well, you just need to put yourself first. Like it's not easy when your whole life, you know, we've built this person, or at least I have, and I think a lot of us have built this personality around this defense mechanism. So it's kind of like any other trait. You know, how we all do one thing tends to be how we do multiple things because it's our personality. It's how we are across the board. So just like a narcissist, if they're you know in that attitude of competition, right, which generally comes across as, you know, lying, cheating, stealing, or like mismanagement, you know, really kind of immature behavior, manipulation, and abuse, they don't tend to just do that in one way. Like they don't just lie to their spouse. You know, they tend to lie to multiple people. They tend to mismanage money in a variety of ways. They tend to have a bunch of really squirrely behavior because in their mind, it's them versus everybody else. And so it's that attitude of I'm just going to do whatever I want and nobody else should have a problem with it. So that was kind of a long explanation for that question, but there was a couple other questions in there from other people that were asking about that. Latarsha's question she asks, what happens to make people be so evil and heartless like this? And that's really what it is. So it's that defense mechanism. It's a very primitive thing. And so, obviously in a good context, in a healthy context, having that fight defense is useful and appropriate if we're in danger. So when it's not appropriate is when we're not in danger. So around friends, around, loved ones, around people that you can trust, something gets off there when a person has that fight mode, when they're stuck in fight mode, when there's no need to fight. Or they're stuck in fawn mode or like friend mode when they need to be able to say, no, wait a minute, like this is not appropriate for me to try to befriend you when you're the enemy, like when you're the one that's causing all of this problems in my life. A healthy response to somebody causing damage in your life would be to get the heck out of there and to cut off contact. So I hope that makes sense. It's interesting stuff, and there's a lot to it. Kevin says opposites attract. And let me stop the chat here. Opposites attract. Okay, so here's my 2 cents on this. I think yes and no. I think water tends to seek its own level. So we all tend to date the same level of function or dysfunction that we're at. And that can be a really hard pill to swallow, because it generally is not obvious at first to a lot of people. And it doesn't necessarily go across the board. I think I could probably make a few exceptions to that. But generally, we tend to date at the same level of function or dysfunction that we are at. So, and friend people as well. So the relationships in our life tend to be at the same level of where we're at. If a person, so Ross Rosenberg talks a little bit about this in his book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, where there's kind of this scale of like narcissism and codependency. So on one end, you have a narcissist who is, let's say, a -10, and then a codependent person that you would say is like a +10. If a person is at like a -5 on the narcissism scale, and a person's on, and this is of course not an exact science, it's just kind of the gauge, right? If a person's at, let's say, a +2 on the codependent scale, odds are that codependent person's going to get out of there because that it's unequal. So they're going to be closer to that solid sense of self, which is in the middle of that spectrum. So like a healthy sense of self is, in part, it's kind of a good blend or a good balance of all of these, in part, right? It's a blend of all of these different defense mechanisms. So it's knowing kind of when to fighting at an appropriate time, friending at an appropriate time, knowing when to rest and freeze at an appropriate time, knowing when to, to forage or fortress or kind of flight, doing all of these different defenses at the appropriate time. And of course, there's, like I said, there's a lot more to it. But so if you had a person who, so it tends to just kind of line up, I guess is what I'm saying. But it's hard to see kind of that. I think for us that there is any stuff there that we possibly even need to look at, because it can really, and I get it because I felt that way for a really long time, where it can really feel like I was in a hit and run accident. Like, had I known better, I would have done better. Like, I didn't realize that this person was a liar and a manipulator and that they weren't being honest. I really thought that they would change, all of those things. But and again, there's a kind of a lot more, there's a lot more to this, but generally, if a person has a good, solid sense of self, those red flags, like they don't need to know with 100% certainty. If they know, if they feel that something's off, they pay attention to that. And they are in tune enough with themselves to know if somebody's mistreating them or abusing them, that that person's causing them harm and they need to get away from them. So there's just a lot to it. Melanie asks, how do you finally go no contact? That is a great question. I think it depends on the person and on the dynamic and kind of on the situation, and there's a lot of different factors at work there. So I think going no contact, assuming that you don't have to stay in contact with them, assuming that you don't have children that they have any type of rights to, or, you know, kind of what have you, but assuming that you really can go no contact, I think what helps is to try to sever those emotional bonds as much as possible. So to really see their behavior clearly for what it is. And I think a good way to do this is, well, first off, it helps to have terms, like words for the different concepts for the things that you're experiencing. So terms like, gaslighting, or kind of the different types of verbal abuse out there, or knowing what's crazy making behavior and those kinds of things. So when we do start experiencing it, we're not so lost in confusion as to what's wrong. Is it me or is it them? Is this a problem? Am I too sensitive? Am I making a big deal out of nothing? Am I perceiving this accurately? Like, there is no wondering, because once you know the terminology, you're like, oh, bingo, like that's what I'm experiencing. So I think education in large part really does help to see the situation clearly, so you can move forward and breaking those emotional ties and doing what's healthy for you, so that you can move yourself to a place where you're safe and sane. Another thing that I think really helps is to write down what is problematic, because that will help cut through that fog of cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is kind of in a nutshell, but it's when we have an emotional investment in a situation. Well, it's mental distress. Okay, it's a $10 term from mental distress, and it's the mental distress we have in a situation, especially if we have an emotional investment in it being a certain way. So if we're experiencing two conflicting thoughts about the same topic at the same time, we're going to have distress about that. So if we have the thought of this person, especially if the thoughts conflict with our action that we want to take. So if we have the thought of this person is abusive, but the action is, boy, I really do miss them, I really want to go back with them, then the other thought might be, well, you're going to have to somehow normalize that abusive behavior and minimize and justify it so it's not so bad, so that thought of, well, nobody's perfect, this isn't so bad, it could always be worse, that new thought that we take on now lines up with the action. So kind of in a nutshell, cognitive dissonance is when we start justifying things. We start justifying things in order to move forward in a way that we want to move forward with. And it happens to all of us, and it happens really, really fast. Especially, again, like if the stronger the emotional investment we have in a situation, the stronger the cognitive dissonance is that we'll experience it. And it's exhausting and it's crazy making. And so when people are continually saying like, well, I'm staying because I love this person, or what's wrong with me? Like, why can't I leave? Why am I still so attached to this person who treats me so terribly? Or people will say, I watched your videos, and I thought that at first that you were really bitter and jaded, and you were just upset about your ex. And then they realize, they're like, oh my gosh, no, this is what's really going on in my relationship too. This really is a problem. But then if their ex starts love bombing and all of the future faking and promises of change, if they want to believe all that because they want the relationship to work, they'll get sucked back in. And then when that behavior surfaces, right, the problematic behavior surfaces, which it's going to, until they actually deal with the underlying issues that's causing that behavior. But once that behavior surfaces, they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I fell for it again. I feel so stupid. What's wrong with me? Because hindsight's always 2020. And the reason hindsight's always 2020 is because we tend to be so far enough out of a situation that we're not so heavily emotionally invested in it. So hindsight is clear vision because we're already down the road. So it's easy to look back and be like, oh my gosh, these are the red flags that I overlooked. This is what was going on. I can't believe this person lied to me. I can't believe I bought these excuses. And you just see everything for what it is. And that's why. So I guess part of it, so what I'm saying is expecting cognitive dissonance to happen, because it does happen. It's a part of it. It's one of the many reasons people tend to get back in these relationships for an average of 7 times before they finally leave for good. So to prepare yourself for that cognitive dissonance, because we all start feeling nostalgic and we're like, oh, maybe, the good times were really good. Maybe things aren't so bad. Maybe we can make this work, kind of given enough, church or therapy or rehab or love or understanding or patience or what have you, this person can be fixed. So a way that that's worked for me and that it's worked for other people to help kind of cut through that is to make a list of everything they've done. And so when you do start missing that person, you can reread that list. And I think you'll find it's amazing how much of that you will have blocked out. And you're like, oh my gosh, like this person lied. They said that they loved cats, but they're like viciously allergic to cats. Like they don't like cats at all. Or this person said that they went to law school and they never even graduated from high school. Like it's amazing the stuff that we kind of gloss over or forget if we don't want to see it or think about it. So it's a good idea to write down all of that stuff, big stuff, little stuff, medium stuff, and then read it. That'll help you to stay no contact a lot easier. And then support groups. I highly recommend support groups. There's lots of them out there. So mine, I have a couple. You can go to my website, thriveafterabuse.com, and there's a support group there. And then there's also a link to my group on Facebook as well from there. But I guess I always encourage people, join a handful of them. And there's quite a few on Facebook. You can find other ones on the internet. And just because it really does help to be around a bunch of people that they get it and they've been there, they've done it, or they're going through it. So when you're having those low moments of, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? I'm really missing this person. I really want to reopen contact. What if I was wrong? What if they're not a narcissist? What if they can change? What if this time is different? Then you can go to the group and they can help you walk through it. Huge for validation and for clarification as to what's going on. So that brings me to another topic on what if they're not a narcissist? So this is a question I get often. And this was actually a question, I had it too. So I have a whole list. Look at all this stuff I have for tonight. Papers, like lots and lots and lots and lots of papers. So what if they're not a narcissist? What if you're wrong, right? Scary stuff, because it's generally a big decision, right? To go no contact with somebody or to cut them out of your life. The thing with narcissism is the word narcissist, the label narcissist isn't important. Labels come and go, they change, the DSM changes all the time. Like, for example, the words sociopath and psychopath, those used to be terms in the DSM. Those are no longer in there. It doesn't mean that there's no such thing as a sociopath. It just means that those terms have been reshuffled and relabeled into a different term. So now they're called antisocial personality disordered people. Same thing with narcissist. So if that term went away, it doesn't mean that what you're experiencing isn't problematic. It just means that that term is no longer in use for whatever reason. So that's part of it. The other part of it is the label is just a pointer. It's a pointer to behaviors. So it's the behaviors that are important. Forget the label. We can call them anything you want to call them. We don't need to use the word narcissist if you don't want to use that word. I think that trips up a lot of people. So look at the behaviors. If you've got a person who, they lie, they cheat, they steal, they manipulate, they abuse, they have no sincere remorse or empathy for their actions, you're finding yourself going around that mountain time and time and time and time again. That's any one of those things is a problem. Any one of those things would be a deal breaker for most people. So again, look at the behavior, forget about the term if it's throwing you off. So, and it's amazing what people can get used to as far as what's problematic. There's definitely this idea of, well, okay, I think this person, they're a narcissist or what have you. They have this problematic behavior, but it could always be worse. Or am I overreacting because, they don't yell or scream or gaslight or hit or even name call, but they're always up to squirrely stuff. So I just don't feel like I can trust them. And it's all about them all the time. They just don't seem to, I give and I give and I give and I give, and it's never enough. And to them, it's like, I didn't give anything. So, is that still a problem, even if they're not name calling and gaslighting and doing all of that? And the answer for me would be absolutely, So if those elements of a healthy relationship are not there, which would be being treated with dignity and respect, even when you're fighting, even when you're disagreeing, right? Being treated with open, honest, sincere, solutions-oriented communication. If those elements aren't there, then the relationship's not going to go smoothly. It's not going to be, there's really not that attitude of cooperation there. And that really needs to be there in order for people to, have a nourishing, empowering environment. So, let's see. Postmodern was saying, talking about labels with a friend the other day, whose child sounded like he was showing traits of oppositional defiant disorder. So so my guess is, with children with oppositional defiant disorder, any type of like emotional or regulation type disorders where there's bouts of anger, there's bouts of rage, that's generally because there's some sort of unprocessed trauma going on there. And this can be really confusing if it's not like an overt trauma. So if the child didn't go through anything, if it kind of goes through like quote unquote normal trauma, like, oh, their parents divorced, or, a kid was teasing them at school, or something like that happened, where we might think, well, that's not that big of a thing. This kind of happens to a lot of people. So what's going on here? We all process traumatic events differently. And so what might be a deep trauma to one person might not be anything to the next person. So, it's a lot, but to kind of, especially working with kids and all of this, because not only do they oftentimes not have the vocabulary to express what's going on, they definitely don't have the terminology for any of this stuff. They don't have any power and control over their environment, right? They're children. Like, that's the worst thing about being a kid, and probably the best thing about being a kid, is that you don't have any responsibility about anything. So if you've got a parent, if your parents are divorced and you've got one parent who's saying, a bunch of stuff about the other parent and they're forced to go over there every weekend, that can be really traumatic because this, child is having to listen to all of this stuff and they don't know how to process it, and they're feeling this anger and this resentment's being built up, and just all kinds of stuff can happen, and it comes out in a wide variety of ways, and not just with like divorced parents, but like I was saying, like just kind of different types of trauma stuff in general. So my brother, here's an example. So as a kid, he was diagnosed with dyslexia. This was back in the early 80s. So this wasn't really like a well-known thing back then. And so he had gotten through school. He'd really gotten up until about third grade without knowing how to read. And nobody knew this. And then one day a teacher caught on, like, oh my gosh, he really doesn't know how to read. He's just been very observant watching these other kids. Well, then he began getting really angry about it because he would get teased by some other kids. He, just struggled and struggled and struggled and struggled with homework. And, my parents, they spent all of this time with him. It was just every night was this whole ordeal with homework with him. It was awful for him. It was probably awful and exhausting for my parents. And so he just really was an angry kid for a long, long time. I mean, I'm talking like punching holes in walls, kicking holes in doors. He would go from 0 to 10 really quickly. And I think a lot of it had to do with his dyslexia. He went to a special school for a while, and there were a lot of really like low functioning kids there. So he got teased for that. And he's like, I don't belong here. And I think he felt like he was being punished. And there was a lot of, I think, he was perceiving a lot of this. It was kind of feeding into this like shame about having this label and the stigma about it, and just kind of all kinds of stuff. So, kind of what we consider trauma, being on the outside looking in versus what a person's really going through, are two very, very different things. Let's see. Doug was saying something to Andy about cutting and pasting. So my guess is Andy had a question. Let me see if I can scroll up here a little bit and see it. Andy, if you do have a question, go ahead. If you would, please copy and paste it, and I'll keep my eyes open for it. I stop the chat when I talk because it's scrolling and I can't read and think at the same time. So it looks like Diana might have a question too. People are saying, oh my gosh, this chat is moving so fast. Yes, it is. It's like a fast moving current. So if I don't get to you guys' questions, it's because for that reason. Let's see. Okay, Andy. Okay, I found your question. Andy says, what can I do about my sister reestablishing contact with my narcissistic mother-in-law and her flying monkey enabling husband, our father? Hold on, I got to think about that. So, is it your mother-in-law? I'm confused. Who's married? Is the mother-in-law married? Okay, her husband is your father, but the mother is the mother-in-law. Okay, I'm kind of lost on how everybody's related to everybody here, but I guess kind of at the bottom line here is you can't control her behavior. So what can you do about it? Nothing. The answer is nothing. All you can do is all that you have power and control over is your reaction and your response to it. So and it's frustrating when people do, when they do befriend or keep contact with somebody that is abusive or that has been abusive to you, and they minimize, they justify, they deny this behavior. It feels very re-victimizing. Like, why are you friends with this abusive person when you know everything that they've done to me or done to us? And that's its own level of crazy making. So I guess for me, I look at that stuff and I think, people, we all make decisions based on the knowledge and understanding we have at the time. And, like, we probably would not make that same decision, right? Like, our decision might be like, we only want people in our lives or even like in our inner circle that are supportive and, somewhat healthy and, or at a minimum, like not abusive, right? So kind of like bare minimum criteria there. That's the hard thing, especially when it comes to family. So if you're having boundaries and you're like, you know what, I am not going to be around this person. This person yells at me, or they all the time, or they cuss, or they're doing all kinds of stuff, and I'm just done. Like, I'm not going to be treated like that again. And that's your boundary. The hard part with drawing boundaries, especially in a family, is that the vast majority of other people tend to not approve of that, because in their mind, it's like, no, this is how mom is, or this is how this person just is. And so they're family. So we just need to forgive and forget, and we need to move past it, and you just need to suck it up and deal with it. I see this a lot, and it's really, and I've even experienced it a lot, even within my own family, but like to a significant degree when you've got a really it's amazing the stuff that people can justify under, by justifying it like, oh, but yes, but yeah, but still, but yeah, but they're a family. Yeah, but still. And that it's not healthy. People can take this to an extreme. I've seen people even, and I hate to say this, but like, well, I won't even go there just in case I've got some family watching tonight. But, I've seen family that they've had relatives that have molested children. They've maybe even molested them. And in their mind, they're like, well, I don't want to rock the boat. That was a long time ago. And, it's important that these kids, they know their uncle. And so then they're having their children around this person or their aunt or whoever the child molester was, this person who they know is dangerous and destructive, because there's this pressure from family, and they're getting this like twisted message that we somehow need to allow dangerous and destructive people to remain in our lives, or worse, in the lives of our children, because they're family. Like, a healthier approach would be, you know what? No. Trust is earned. It's not blindly given. This is my inner circle. I'm not for sure not going to be sacrificing my children for the sake of family peace. So no, like, I'm not having my children around this abusive person. Or kind of like wherever your limits are, and obviously, like, whatever the person's behavior might be. But to an extreme level like that, to me, that's just kind of a, pretty obvious thing to keep children away from a dangerous person like that. But again, family dysfunction runs deep, and it's amazing how twisted that kind of stuff can be. So I know that wasn't exactly your question. I kind of went off on a tangent about that, but yeah, at the end of the day, all you have control over is your response, your reaction. I would just realize, okay, this is what she's doing. I don't agree with it. And you don't have to discuss anything with her. You don't have to justify your actions. You have your boundaries. It might mean, that's the thing too with boundaries, is when we set them, realizing other people are probably not going to be okay with that, and that we need to be okay with whatever action or reaction they might have, especially within a family. So that can oftentimes mean other people then getting upset and trying to push you into, violating your own boundaries. So, but you need to do what you need to do to keep yourself safe and sane, realizing you can't control other people, and be around family that does get it and that is supportive of you doing what you need to do to stay safe. Okay, let me scroll down. Kitty Cat says, my boyfriend admits that he's defensive because he was bullied as a child. Does that mean he isn't a narcissist? So hold on a second. Let me get a drink here. So again, I would encourage you to put the label aside and look at the behavior. So, what kind of behavior does he have? If he has problematic behavior, is he willing to work towards changing it? Does he have a sincere desire to actually change it? A sincere desire to actually change it means that change is happening. So if he's like, oh, you know what, I'm abusive because I was bullied as a kid, but then he continues to be abusive, then he's not ready, willing, or able to change that. So then the ball's back in your court with, okay, at what is a deal breaker for you? And how long are you going to stay in there waiting for this change to happen? So those are some kind of questions that I would encourage you to look at instead. And again, a lot of people get hung up on the term, and I get it because I was there too. But so I would encourage you to put the terminology aside because it's not cut and dry. It's not like a person's either a narcissist or they're not a narcissist. Like it's on a spectrum of like problematic behavior. As far as I'm concerned, really anywhere on that spectrum is a problem. Like I just steer clear of the spectrum. So, but with that being said, there is, just kind of for the sake of clarity, this doesn't have so much to do with your question, but there is a healthy, what's called quote unquote healthy narcissism. So, that's different than what we're talking about. So healthy narcissism is the internal drive of, yeah, I can do this. Like, why not now? Why not me? It kind of what gets us out of bed in the morning, and we have goals and plans, and we're driven to accomplish things. That's healthy narcissism. Where it becomes unhealthy is when it becomes this. So healthy narcissism is like, I can do it, right? Unhealthy narcissism is more of like that's taken to an extreme where it's not only like I can do it, it's like I can do it and you can't. So then it becomes like this win-lose type behavior, type spectrum kind of stuff. And that's when it becomes problematic because it's that mentality of there can be only one, like it's only them at the expense or at the sake of everybody else. That kind of stuff is problematic. But again, it goes back to how does this, abuse, addiction, adultery, or attitude, any one of those things in my book is a deal breaker. So do they have any form of abusive behavior? Whether it's verbal, emotional, psychological, sexual, financial, physical, spiritual. How are they with that? Do they treat you with dignity and respect? Addiction, do they have any active addictions? Especially addictions if you're like drugs, alcohol, gambling, porn, those kinds of things. Problem. That's a problem. That's a big problem. Abuse, addiction, adultery. Are they cheating? That's a problem. Attitude. How do they handle things when you bring up an issue? Do they treat you with dignity and respect? Do they listen to you? Do they take your concerns seriously? Or are you treated with disrespect and with a lack of dignity? Are you continually being like invalidated? Are your concerns being minimized? Are they calling you names? Are they gaslighting? Are they projecting? Are they, how are you walking on eggshells? Are you avoiding bringing up certain topics because of, how they react? If you bring up a topic, do you get the silent treatment? Or do they up and break up with you? Do they start screaming at you? Any of that is, to me, that's problematic stuff. That's deal breaker stuff. So, That's the kind of stuff I would look at. If, and again, people often say, and I get it too, and there is some truth to this, that, well, okay, but nobody's perfect, right? Or they might tell themselves, well, but who am I to judge? Because they might think, well, I've had some pretty major stuff in my life, so that can be a real slippery slope with thinking along those lines. So yes, so while nobody's perfect, this doesn't mean that abusive behavior or abuse, addiction, adultery, or an attitude of disrespect and invalidation is okay. Okay. Same thing with, well, who am I to judge? The answer to that is, it doesn't have to be about judging anybody, but it does have to be about using a level of discernment about what you want in your life. So this goes back to having that healthy defense mechanism, that healthy response of, I don't need to judge people, but I do need to be able to say, this is what's harmful to me, or this is what's helpful to me, and to know the difference, and then to act accordingly with that. So I hope that helps kind of clear some stuff up. But lots of people get caught up in that. It's a really great question. Let's see. Scrolling down. Postmodern asks, do narcissist and borderline overlap? So, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked by the chat. There's so many, every time I scroll down, there's like all these other side conversations that I come across that are super interesting. Okay, so it depends on who you ask. By and large, yes, a lot of their behaviors do overlap. I think, again, I think it kind of depends on who you ask. So some, especially like trauma specialists, will say that the core of like a borderline, like a true borderline personality is narcissism. It's that fight defense of me versus you. And the way that they do that, the way that they tend to go about manipulating and trying to have power and control over their environment is through extreme behavior. So like threatening suicide, screaming, yelling, drama. Like borderline is synonymous with drama. It's a poor emotional regulation. They're just kind of very volatile. They can be very vindictive, very malicious. I think when people tend to think of really awful, witchy, horrible women in particular, they're talking about borderline. So like really, really dramatic, erratic, kind of just the kind of behavior where if things don't go their way, then they will give a person hell. That to me is a true borderline. And not just to me, but to a lot of like trauma specialists as well. And there's other trauma specialists that tend to make a differentiation, which I think I love this. And this is what I see day in and day out with the different people that I work with, is that there really are two different types of borderline. I fully believe this. I think you've got what shows up as borderline personality disorder when the core of that is a fight defense, which is what I was just talking about. But then I think you have the borderline personality that shows up when you have the core that's more of that fawn defense. Because the vast majority, and I've met, I mean, I had a friend in high school who is classic borderline personality disorder, and she was absolutely awful. The good times were really good, but oh my God, the bad times were awful. I mean, she would overdose at parties if she didn't get enough attention. If a guy didn't like her, she would throw a fit. She would threaten. She'd manipulate. She just was I was constantly walking on eggshells trying to prove myself to her. She just was an incredibly difficult person. And I didn't, and I used to even joke back then, I feel like I'm in an abusive relationship, but to me it was a joke because I'm like, well, it can't be an abusive relationship because she's a friend. Because in my mind, back then, an abusive relationship had to be with a boyfriend or a husband, not just a friend. So let me take another drink here. So I think the core, when you have more of like that fawn defense, you tend to still have those emotional irregularity where a person runs really hot and cold. They're very intense. But like I said, I've worked with a lot of people that have been diagnosed as borderline, and to me, there's a very big difference. So those kinds of people, to me, it seems like you've got basically a codependent person who has a lot of unprocessed trauma, and they do not know how to handle it. Because, I mean, it's unprocessed trauma. And so we all handle things to the best level of our capacity and our understanding. And so it does tend to come out as, to me, I think when it's a fawn defense, their suicide attempts tend to be sincere, whereas the narcissistic core tends to be manipulative and controlling. But the other types of borderlines, I've met so many borderlines, they will give you the shirt off their back. They are just some of the like, they give and they give and they give and they care and they care and they care. And they're the ones that tend to really get tangled up with a lot of like narcissists and sociopaths. Not so much, well, I guess sometimes the other types of borderlines do too, but they tend to be, kind of like your Bonnie and Clydes. Like they're both up to a bunch of mayhem and foolishness, whereas the other borderlines tend to be used and abused. But yes, there is a lot of, that's why I say there is a lot of overlap between them. But again, it depends on who you ask and kind of what their take is on it. And frankly, I think that so there's that therapy, right? I'm sure you guys have heard of it, the DBT therapy, the dialectical behavioral therapy, which is basically mindfulness. It's very Buddhist in its origins, and it helps with emotional regulation. Again, from what I have seen, is that when you have a codependent person that's gone through a lot of trauma, that has like quote unquote borderline features, DBT helps them tremendously because their issue isn't so much a personality disorder, it's unprocessed trauma. Then you have the borderlines that have the narcissism as at the core. DBT tends to make them worse. And therapy in general tends to make them worse. So now they're holding everybody hostage, they start acting like they're incredibly dramatic. They're just off the charts with stuff. They're like, well, I'm borderline and you don't understand and you don't know. And all of their behavior gets 10 times worse. And a lot of times friends and family are like, wait a minute, this person's been diagnosed as borderline. They're going through therapy and it's making them worse. What's going on here? Again, this is just my 2 cents on it, but that's what's going on there. Because that narcissism, it's that fight response that's grabbing on to anything. Ego is a funny thing. We have these defense mechanisms for a reason, and it's to defend ourselves. So it's a lot of this is such like a subconscious thing that's going on. So if a person's feeling threatened in any way, shape, or form, because if we give up the defense mechanism that we have, then we actually have to deal with things. We have to deal with the pain and the trauma. There's such a tearing down of everything, and then an understanding, and then a rebuilding. And it's a long process, and it's an intense journey into ourselves. So if you've got that narcissism, that defense mechanism where it's them versus us, they're in that constant fight mode, that's a really hard defense mechanism to break through to. And so anything that comes across its path, they tend to grab onto that and use it to strengthen their defenses, if that makes sense. So real quick too, before I forget, this was another thing that came up in the support group lately. Let me get another sip here. Is using the word narcissist. So I get it. This is something that I really struggled with for like a year in this support group, was feeling kind of uncomfortable about that word. And for a lot of different reasons, because like we talked about earlier tonight, this word trips up a lot of people. They get caught up in, and again, like I was there too, so I get it. They get caught up in, well, is this person, it's this very black or white thinking. Are they a narcissist, or are they a normal person with a ton of really bad behavior, but that could possibly change, right? Like, are they a narcissist or are they normal? And so that's one of the reasons I tend to use different terms to try to describe narcissists, to get people to kind of think outside of that box so they can see the behavior and not get so focused on the labels. But another thing is, so what I hear a lot, and I even said this for like the longest time in the support group, is because people want validation. They're like, well, is this person a narcissist? And it's kind of funny when you think about it, 'cause everybody's like, freaks out when they hear that word. Like, not even just in support groups, like in general, like friends, family, even therapists are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, well, we don't know. Like, this person was not diagnosed. They were not diagnosed as a narcissist, so we're not even going there. And like, they totally freak out, which is really funny when you think about it, because we don't have the same reaction if we call a person an alcoholic or an addict or anything else. But when it comes to a personality disorder, people like lose their mind. They're like, oh my God, no, I'm sorry. We need to have clinical proof this person needs a psychiatric evaluation before we can use that word. And it's ridiculous when you think about it, because you don't need a diagnosis. You don't need an outside professional with like 9 years of education to tell you whether or not a person is a selfish jerk. And there's something wrong as a society if we do need a person with 9 years education to be able to validate us and say, yes, this person is a selfish jerk. Like, to me, that's a huge problem. Huge. So it makes me wonder, like, as a society, how on earth did we get to this place where we've like turned over our power and control as to accurately assessing a situation over to other people who don't know, who they may or may not be personality disordered for all we know, right? They may or may not be addicts or alcoholics. They may or may not be abusive. They may or may not they might not even know. Might not even normally deal with personality disorders. Like, we just don't know this other person's training, but yet we're so quick to give our perception of reality and what's right or wrong over to a complete stranger that we've known for 45 minutes. To me, that's absolutely ridiculous and totally wild and absurd. Absurd. Like, if you were to write that in a fiction book, it wouldn't even be believable because it's so outrageous. But yet, this is what we do. So I kind of feel like, it just really, really frustrates me. And I understand wanting that validation. I was there too. But what concerns me is if a person doesn't get that validation. If they do see, and maybe that clinician might not even realize that they're necessarily there for validation, right? But it's important that we be able to accurately tell when a person has harmful behavior, and then to be able to respond accordingly. So that's just kind of my 2 cents on that. We were just really getting going in the support group on my website about it, because it really makes me angry. And what really gets me angry about that is when a person does go to a clinician and they say, my mother or this person's a narcissist, and the clinician says, well, we don't know, we haven't diagnosed them, so we're not going to call them a narcissist. And then this person is feeling very invalidated and minimized, because really, I think what a clinician should be doing in that situation is, again, forget the label, pay attention to the behaviors. So if a person's describing their experience as, my mother is a narcissist, here's what's going on, that's their perception of their reality. And for the clinician to roll with that instead of fighting them about it and then getting power over them and being like, well, no, I think that's invalid. I don't like you using that term. You're not licensed to diagnose who's a selfish jerk. Only I am. Like that to me is a sign of a really bad clinician and to go elsewhere, because it's important that what you're experiencing is validated, kind of labels aside. But if you feel like you're being not heard, and they can't see what you're describing and they're challenging you, it's not cool. So that's my 2 cents on it. And people just, have faith in your perception of events. So, and frankly, a person, and I think what helps people is, and it's so interesting because people freak out when you say this person's a narcissist or a sociopath, right? They're like, oh, I don't know, I need a diagnosis. But if you were to say, shift it a little bit to the right a little bit and say, well, this behavior is really narcissistic or sociopathic, then people tend to be more okay with that. So that's kind of another way to describe what you're going through without, that's something that people can't really argue with, I guess, is why that doesn't cause people to get so defensive. Because if a person's acting narcissistic, then, like, okay, well, I could see that. Yeah, they're being a, grandiose, selfish, entitled jerk. Or if they're being sociopathic, they're, they have no regard for other people or for laws or, they're exploiting people or what have you. People tend to be more okay with it if you talk in terms of behavior instead of labels. So. Ooh, that's a good point. I like that. Postmodern says, this is kind of off topic, but she says, a nice guy doesn't need to say that they're a nice guy. I think Psychopath Free talks about that. Yeah, there's another book out there, and I think we were talking about this last week. It's a book called The Gift of Fear. Have you read that? It was one of our book club books, and it was fantastic. And he brings up something very similar to that, where you can tell that something's off if a person's giving you like unnecessary detail. So if kind of like what you're saying, if they're like, hey, I'm a nice guy, I am honest, I am trustworthy, I am not gonna hurt you. Like, normal people don't go around telling other people like, I am not gonna hurt you. It's okay. Yikes. That's creepy, because you don't need to, that should just go without saying, right? So that's an interesting book. Recovering Soul says, I love The Gift of Fear. Yeah, I did too. Great book. One of the books I would say, I don't know if I'd recommend reading it if a person's still feeling a lot of those kind of complex post-traumatic stress type feelings where you're feeling hypervigilant, because that book can it probably would make things a lot worse, because it's just, he goes into a lot of different stories and, it kind of tends to maybe feed a little bit into that hypervigilance if a person's already feeling it. If you're not feeling the hypervigilance, then it's a really great, interesting read. Another thing, actually, hold on, I wrote, where did they? Cha-cha-cha. Oh gosh, where did I write this? I wrote down some ways that you can tell something is off. I have no idea. It's so weird. I don't know where I wrote that. Anyways, so in the book, The Gift of Fear, he talks about ways that our brain processes or tries to process things that don't compute. And one of the examples he gives in there is that we tend to use sarcasm as a mask, as a cover for issues that we have, but that we're not comfortable addressing, which is very true. So people, and not necessarily only sarcasm, but also like, mean teasing or joking, especially if it's cruel or hurtful, right? So there's always that kernel of truth inside all humor, and that's why we have humor. It's a way of processing things that we're not comfortable with. Another thing that we do, this was so interesting in that book, was what he called dark humor. So to me, is absolutely fascinating. In the book, he gives some examples of, they did like a study of people that had received mail bombs. And most of them had said they got a package in the mail, and they even said, that looks like a bomb. And other people were like, yeah, that's really weird. It does look like a bomb. And then they opened the package and it was a bomb. And then it like went off and it killed people. But the survivors were saying like, this is what had happened. And he said that's so interesting, or people were talking about different shootings, like office shootings, when a disgruntled employee would come back. And as people were experiencing all of this going down, they were joking and they were like, oh, before they realized it was a shooter, they were like, okay, I really hope that's not, Bill Johnson coming back trying to get revenge, ha ha. And then sure enough, it was him. So the reason being is that we're picking up on these external clues as to what's going on. Like you're hearing the sounds, you're seeing seeing something that doesn't add up. You're hearing sounds that don't add up. But because our brain, it's processing at a deeper level, but because it's not something we normally experience, we're rationalizing it. And so we're rationalizing it by normalizing it by using sarcasm or by using dark humor to try to understand what we're experiencing. Fascinating stuff. Another way that you can tell when something's off is if you find yourself asking advice. So to me, this is like it's so cool. Like once you can start seeing your behavior like this, it's like the Matrix. Like, that scene in there where they're walking down the hallway and they see that cat, and Keanu Reeves is like, whoa, he sees the cat twice and he's like, whoa, deja vu. And Trinity stops and she's like, what did you say? And he says, nothing. I just saw that cat walk by twice. And he's like, it was just really weird. And she says, no, deja vu, it's a glitch in the system. Like it's not just deja vu. It means there's something else that's going on in here. And it's kind of like that when we ask for advice. So when we're asking for advice, it's a sign of cognitive dissonance. It's a sign that we know the answer, but we wish we didn't. And so we're asking other people in an effort to talk ourselves into the answer that we hope that it is. Or really in an attempt to get more clarity one way or the other. But generally we tend to just try to we want to be told we want to hear what we want to hear is what it is. But we don't ask for advice when we have clarity about a situation. And if you think about it, they say confusion is the first sign of a problematic situation in general. And we don't normally have confusion unless we're experiencing something that's problematic. So I think it's an interesting way to kind of slow things down and look at things. Same thing with saying, I don't know. So if you find yourself acting in a way or doing something and your response is, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know why I'm acting like that, or I don't know why I did that, or I wish I knew kind of what's going on. The reality is you do know. It's at a deeper level, and it's hard for that awareness to rise to the surface because deep down we really don't want to know. Interesting stuff. Okay, let me scroll down. Jana asks, how long does it take to heal from decades of narcissistic abuse once you go no contact? That's a big question, and I think it depends on a lot of different factors. Let's see. Sorry, my nose itches. I'm having allergies this time of year. So everybody heals at a different rate, and there is really kind of no time frame. It's just an individual. It's an individual thing, and it's just gonna depend on a lot of different factors. I think getting into a good support group really helps. Educating yourself as much as possible about all this really helps. If you can find a good therapist, that can really help. I think also kind of examining your understandings of what happened and working through all of that. And I think those realizations, that awareness tends to come in waves. And so I guess really at the bottom of it is just realizing that their behavior is a reflection of them. It's not a reflection of you. So depending on what you went through, if you went through like a lot of name calling and put downs and gaslighting and crazy making behavior where you really felt like you were the problem and you were doubting your sanity and your perception and all of that, to realize that you were with a person who, have a lot of issues. And unfortunately, those issues came out onto you. And that none of it was personal, even though it feels incredibly personal, even though you were the target, most likely, of a lot of this abuse, that it wasn't personal. Had you not been there, it would have been somebody else. So it's kind of the saying, hurt people hurt people. But as far as healing and moving forward, so I guess kind of understanding that it's not you, and that narcissists and emotional manipulators, they exploit a person's vulnerabilities and they exploit a person's insecurities, and they're master manipulators. And most of us just have no clue that these people are out there. Or if we do realize that they're out there, we just think that we can see them coming, and we don't realize oftentimes that we're even in an abusive relationship or that things are even a problem for a long, long time. It oftentimes takes people 5, 10, 15 years before they really realize this, in fact, is a problem. So, kind of just having that validation and clarity with all of that, there's a part of it, a big part of healing is kind of rediscovering yourself, because that's the price. That's the price of a relationship with a narcissist, is we have to sacrifice ourselves. So, because it's all about them. Like they take and they take and they take and they take, and there are these energy vampires. And if all we know what to do is give and give and give in an attempt to make this relationship work, then we're exhausted, and by the end of it, a lot of people feel like they're just a shell of their former self. So there's a large period of kind of rediscovery into who you are and what you're about. And that can be very overwhelming for a lot of people, myself included, but it can be very exciting too, because you're kind of getting to know yourself. Somebody had described earlier, I think it was on Instagram, somebody had posted something like, this is one of the hardest things she'd ever been through, and she really felt like she was being reborn for that reason. Like she just didn't have any sense of self left, and everything about her had been erased or eroded by her former partner. And here she is today trying to rebuild everything, trying to get back in touch with who she is. And so and there's a lot of other emotions that go along with that, right? There's anger, there's grief, there's sadness, there's just this whole wide range of emotions. And that's all of that is totally normal. It's all part of it. So if you're moving forward in this to try to discover, who are you and what do you like? What do you like? What are your likes and dislikes? And then that can be kind of overwhelming too, especially if you're like, I don't know. I really don't know. So I guess to just be aware that feeling that sadness and frustration and overwhelm at not knowing things that you're like, most people know these things. Most people have a sense of style. Most people kind of know what kind of music they like or know what kind of food they like, or they have more of like a routine and a solid sense of self. And if you feel like kind of adrift at sea with not really knowing who you are, what you like, or what you're about, that's overwhelming, and it can take a little while to kind of get your sea legs about who you are and what you want in this life. So I would encourage you, when you're focusing on your healing and you're finding yourself again and you're rebuilding, and again, this is kind of, later stage stuff, is to pay attention to how you feel. And kind of in a nutshell, doing more of what feels good. As long as it's empowering to yourself and to other people, right? So if you really find a lot of enjoyment curling up with a trashy romance novel, then do that. If it feels really good to go for a run or to dye your hair purple or to, you know what I mean, to kind of do whatever, then do that. That's okay. It's okay to be you. It's okay to express yourself. This is all part of reclaiming your power and control and finding your voice in all of this. So let me back up a little bit. The first stage for most people with this tends to be anger and rage, especially with the more education they get about narcissism. And, it's wild when you start, like you're here, so you're starting to realize, you're like, oh my gosh, it's not just me. I'm not crazy. This is valid. And that this has gone kind of, nobody pointed this out for like a long time, and that you didn't realize it was a problem. So there's a lot of like different waves of anger that come over people. And sometimes those waves of anger can lead to tremendous amounts of rage and outrage. And it can be really difficult to know how to handle that much anger when it surfaces. But it's very, very, it's just all normal. It's just so normal. There's that book that I was mentioning earlier, that Complex PTSD book, is a great one. I have a book club. It's free, and I post my notes. We're going to start doing a live stream once a month where whoever wants to participate, can read the book, and then we're going to get together for like an hour or so and then discuss the different books and our takeaways from it. But that might be something good to do as well. If you go to my website, which is thriveafterabuse.com, and you go to book club, you can see all of the different notes for all of the different books. And I think that can be there's about 9 or 10 books on there or so. That can be a great way to kind of really dive into a lot of this stuff, and to really get a good grip and understanding on it. So the more you know, I think the more it tends to contribute towards the healing and understanding. So, hey, Josh is here. Mercury says, yes, the rage I feel for being so stupid for years. The website's thriveafterabuse.com. It should be in my description for my videos, in my about page as well. So Mercury, real quick, like we were talking about earlier, it's, hindsight is always 20/20. And when we're emotionally invested in a situation, it's really hard to see it clearly. Really hard. This is why hindsight's always 20/20, because down the road, we're not emotionally invested in it anymore. So we can look behind us and see what was really going on. But yes, very normal to feel like just gullible and naive and stupid and all of those things. But again, you know, these people are master manipulators. And so many of us, we made the mistake of taking them at face value because we don't think that way, right? We tend to think, everybody really on the planet tends to think that most people, by and large, are like them. So if we treat other people with open, honest, sincere, solutions-oriented communication, we expect the same from them. And it, you know, you almost have to encounter a person like this to realize that it's not that way. But it can be really difficult to see for a long time that this person, especially if they're saying all the right things and they're doing the future faking and they're all of these promises of change, and change never happens. And especially if you're getting a lot of well-intended bad advice where people are, encouraging a person to stay. There's just so many different levels of crazy making to it. But you're not stupid. You're not stupid at all. At all. This has nothing to do with intellect or any of it, because we're being driven like literally, like it literally has nothing to do with intelligence. Sort of like a lot. For example, here's another example. Like a lot of the members of the Heaven's Gate cult were engineers. People that tend to get tangled up with emotional manipulators are doing so for emotional reasons. And just like, I get people that email me or that are even here in the live stream, they are doctors or lawyers or therapists, people that you would think, okay, well, this can't happen to them, but it can happen. It can happen to anybody because emotional manipulators exploit vulnerabilities and they exploit insecurities. And even though a person might know about narcissism, it's different when it's you. It's different when you have that emotional investment to this person, because our initial reaction is to want to normalize what we're experiencing. So just kind of for the record, you're not stupid. So Recovering Soul says, yes, we were deliberately deceived. Yep. Viking Warrior says, our anger was a normal reaction, but they used to call us the crazy ones. They'd flip it all around. Yes. Yes. Anger is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. And oftentimes that's exactly what they do. So they do a bunch of crazy making things because it's all a bunch of like illogical, irrational behavior, because when you're dealing with a defense mechanism, you're dealing with like a survival mechanism. So there is no, like it says like the core of the brain, this is like the reptilian brain at work. So when a person's down in that defense mechanism, they're like a million miles away from conscious, logical, rational thought. Like their brain has downshifted way down to survival mode. And so if we're trying to be reasonable and logical and rational using that prefrontal cortex, like the logic and reason part of our brain, with somebody who's in survival mode, we're talking two different languages, because they're in a panic and we're trying to discuss, higher level thinking. It's not, no solution can be reached at that point. So Martine says, I'm getting to that point of allowing myself to be angry. I'm so scared of my anger for some reason, and it's easier to be mad at myself. I really hate that. That's really insightful. That's really insightful. And I think probably a lot of people feel that way, because it's scary. It can be really scary to start to feel that anger, because it can, I think for a lot of people, it's that feeling of feeling out of control, especially if that anger is a slippery slope into outright rage. It's sort of like, if I open up that box, that door, I don't know if I can shut it again. And if I unleash all of this fury that I've built up, I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm not sure what I even really want to have happen, because it might mean that I freak out and I say a bunch of stuff and it ends a bunch of friendships or family relationships or what have you. I don't want to say things I can't unsay. And it's it's a tough line to walk. It really, really is. So I feel for you. It's a tough place to be in. So, and maybe trying to gradually explore that anger as it surfaces, and, instead of kind of letting all the horses out of the barn all at one time, being okay, like what can I handle, and then pulling it back a little bit, and then what can I handle, and then pulling it back a little bit until you get more and more comfortable that you can control your anger instead of like, being dragged by a pack of wild horses, right? So, and this was a point that was discussed again in that complex PTSD book, but and I keep mentioning this because I think it's just so profound and so helpful, is that concept of emotional flashbacks. So as you're going through life, kind of what have you, and you find yourself being triggered by something, the gift in that is whenever we're triggered, it's a sign of pain, right? That's a sign of, hey, this is like, hey, over here, me, unresolved issues. Like, here I am. I'm an unresolved issue. Can you please? I need to be worked on. So once we resolve that issue, then that trigger, it goes away. It's resolved. And that's really powerful stuff. But it can take a little while to get to that place. So it can be really, really challenging depending on how intense the trigger is, how intense the pain is that's behind that trigger. So as you're feeling it, and so, again, I've mentioned this, like, for me, what I've realized, and I probably, every person's different, but I'm just going to tell you what I've noticed in me in case it is similar for you. But for me, I've noticed when I get triggered, two of the things that I notice that I do is and I can feel it. Actually, three things. I have a really hard time being quiet. I get really angry, and I can feel myself saying things that I'm like, Dana, just stop talking. And I just get so angry, and it's just stuff's coming out of my mouth. And even during that, I can feel like you just need to stop talking. Like, you need to kind of rein it in, because you're saying a bunch of stuff you can't unsay. And not, maybe even not necessarily that to that extreme, but it's the realization of, oh my gosh, I don't want to be this person that has such anger and venom, because that's how it feels, like venom inside of me, I'm just dumping this whenever I'm getting triggered. Like, that's not okay with me. So that's a sign for me if I'm feeling venomous and like on the attack. If I'm cussing, because I don't normally cuss, like seriously, like I'll cuss as a joke and among friends or whatever, but it's like lighthearted cussing. I don't normally cuss out of anger. So if I'm cussing out of anger, then that's a sign that I'm really being triggered. And then if the third one is that I can feel it. It's a disproportionate response to or reaction, I should say, a disproportionate reaction to what's going on in the moment. So, and it could be something like, I don't know. I have ongoing issues with some coworkers that are well intended. Like, nothing they're even doing is intended to be hurtful, but it's my perception of their actions. It's totally triggering for me, and it just I go from 0 to 10, and it's awful. So trying to stay aware, trying to stay present when those triggers do surface, when those signs do surface, and being like, okay, like, I am not being I'm not in the moment right now. Like, I'm being triggered. This is a sign that there's this unresolved issue that I need to examine, and just try to stay present with my feelings and to try to get more curious about them than judgmental, I guess. And to try to just rein it in and realize, Dana, like none of this is real. Like this is not even going on. This is all your perception of stuff. It's just residual stuff. That kind of helps. So I would encourage you to try to do the same. So as this stuff is surfacing, to examine it and be like, okay, what's really going on here? I don't know. It can be very powerful. Oh, Martine says, okay, so why do I never see you do that, Dana? I never catch you in the act. You are always contained somehow. Oh, I don't know about that. Like there has been a few times in live streams where I feel like I've kind of gone bananas and had to rein it in. So I guess you just weren't there for that. But by and large, my personality is I am not a fighter. Like I really am not. I'm a talker. So if there's something that's going on with me, if I'm dating a person or I'm friends with the person, we talk. We talk a lot. Like we probably have maybe, if there's such a thing, like too much communication. So we're continually talking about stuff. It's just fighting. I don't know. It's just not my communication style. So it's never been a thing. Which is why it's a sign for me if I go from 0 to 10 and I get really angry about something, then like, wow, that's really out of character for me. And that's a sign that something's off. Ryan says she does talk a lot. Ryan, you know what they say about people that live in glass houses. So, my friend, you do too. But it's fun. I'm just giving you a hard time. It is fun. So, yeah, No More was saying, I've never seen you really get angry, but I have seen pain in your face when hearing certain stories of abuse or thoughts of suicide. Yeah, and you know, they say for a lot of people, like anger is the bodyguard of pain. And I think that's very true. And how people, I think socially and culturally and probably even gender specifically process anger is very different. I mean, I noticed this too when I was working with teenagers. By and large, with the kids I was working with, boys, again, this is not like a hard and fast rule, but like boys, if they experienced anger, tended to lash outwards. They were the ones, they were joining gangs, they were being destructive, they were kind of running amok, they were really, violent, kind of out of control. Girls, when they tend to experience, again, like by and large, not a hard and fast thing, when a lot of women or girls tend to experience anger, it's turned inwards. And it generally comes across as depression. It comes across as feeling suicidal. It's more self-harm kind of stuff. So it's cutting. It's it's just self-harm kind of stuff. It's interesting how we all process anger differently. Yeah, Kevin was saying, I was just sharing with somebody that I can't get rid of my resentment until I deal with the pain. Anger is the bodyguard to pain. It makes sense to me. Yes, it does. I don't, Kevin, okay, so I'll be posting my notes on the book, Healing the Inner Child, I think is the title of it, Healing the Inner Child, probably tomorrow in the book club. If you want to read through that. So he talks, that book, Healing the Inner Child, it's an older book. I don't know when it was written. If I had to guess, just kind of like looking at the artwork on the cover, I would guess probably in the 70s. The Pete Walker book on complex PTSD seems to be very much a continuation of the ideas of healing the child within, or healing the inner child. I always get that title mixed up. Both of those are great books. And the Healing the Inner Child book, he talks a lot about a lot of the same stuff Pete Walker talks about, but he also talks about how to move forward and heal from this. And so I'm excited because this is going to be the first book that we start the online live stream book club with. So there's like a little bug in here. So I'll be curious to see what people have to say, kind of what aha moments and takeaways they have from that book, because for me, there was really quite a few of them. And yeah, it really does help. Because that's the thing, like when there's so much, that's the hard thing with anger. Well, first off, it serves a purpose, right? Because it is the bodyguard to pain. If we don't know how to process the pain, then the anger is not going to go away, because the anger is there to do a job. The anger is this defense that we have. And it's like peeling an onion. So you've got to get rid of the anger, and then, that core of that, and it's different levels of pain. And it's kind of this continual process of peeling back these layers until we can really kind of find what's at the core. And I don't think necessarily it's one thing, right? Like it's probably multiple things and multiple layers. So, yeah, it's intense. It's intense stuff, realizing that and kind of trying to get to the bottom of it. And, I think again, like for me, what helped was to just set the course to, I'm not going to let this destroy my life. Like just kind of making that intention and just knowing, like, I don't know how, like, I don't know how I'm not going to let this destroy my life, because at the time I already felt like my life was destroyed. But, well, I guess I shouldn't say that. I didn't feel like my life was destroyed. I felt like my life had been blown into a million pieces. So I felt like I was walking around the disaster zone, like that this was my life. And here I was, I forget how old I am. I'm 39 now. I was probably like 35, 36 at the time, and feeling like and it's all relative, right? So there's people out there that are rebuilding at, 56 or 76 or even 96 from this kind of stuff. But anyhow, so it's all relative. But at the time I just felt, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be here, and look at this mess, and how am I going to move forward in this? But realizing I'm not going to let this destroy my life. Like, yes, I have quite the project in front of me, but this can be done. I can rebuild. And I guess just kind of knowing that made me dig my heels in, because it just took that option of destroying my life off the table. So it's like, okay, well, since that's not an option, then what direction am I going to steer into? And then kind of thinking, okay, I'm going to use this, damn it, for my highest and greatest good. And then kind of setting the intention to that direction. And that kind of just gave me a course in which to steer. And then the realization of, you know what? No, I'm not going to just stop there. I'm going, like this is like anger, right? Like I'm not going to just use this to my highest and greatest good. I'm going to make this work for the highest and greatest good of others. Like that would be the ultimate in this situation. This would be me, quote unquote, winning. Would be able to take what happened to me and give my pain a purpose. And so I would encourage everybody to do that, whatever that means to you, to use your pain for your purpose. Use it as rocket fuel, because there's a lot of energy in anger, and you can harness that. You can harness it, and you can make that anger work for you. A lot of people, they go through something traumatic, and they're like, you know what? I am done. I am done being treated this way, or I am done with whatever. And they use that, and then they get into like the most amazing shape of their life, or they write a book, or they, get organized, or they start a business, or they they go take on kind of this massive undertaking in order to refocus that energy, that anger, that fuel into something positive and constructive for them. So just kind of some thoughts on that. Oh my gosh. Awe says, the ex-narc said, your anger is your pain showing. He'd say this in reference to his affair and his betrayal. Oh, what a jerk. His gut punch stuff. Yep. Yep. So, and that's what they do. It's that provoking kind of stuff. They hit you where it hurts. And it's all designed to elicit this reaction to get you to respond. Because they're very sick people. Like, it's very twisted thinking. They're very sick people. And because again, like, hurt people hurt people. Like, healthy people don't hurt people like that. And yeah, I'm sorry you went through that. That's really hurtful and ridiculous. Martine says, I often wondered how you handled anger before it becomes a conflict. Well, like I said, I do. I bring stuff up with people. Well, I should, for a long time, I didn't bring stuff up with people. So I really had the mentality or the mindset of kind of nothing. I considered myself to be very go with the flow, and not realizing that that was me being passive and that that wasn't healthy and that I was being a doormat, because it wasn't problematic enough to catch my attention. So I thought it was a good quality to be so go with the flow. Now I can kind of tell that that's a sign that something's off. If I don't have an opinion about something, if I am being go with the flow, then I'm like, okay, what's really going on here? Is it I'm uncomfortable stating my opinion, or do I truly just not have an opinion and I could be fine either way? Because generally I do have an opinion, but I think for so long I was used to my opinion not mattering that, like, I just quit saying what I really wanted, because I was either, invalidated or belittled, or it was discounted, or what have you. But now, if there's some sort of issue, it's brought up, where it's not that's the thing. If you can catch a lot of this stuff when it's small, then it's not an issue. And if you're okay with walking away from, or at a minimum distancing yourself from harmful situations, then it's like, and you're totally okay. Like, you're totally okay with setting a boundary and having the other person go bananas and being like, well, I'm sorry that you feel that way. I'm still going to go do what I'm going to do. Like, it's fine that you're not okay with me, like, distancing myself. Like, you don't need to be okay with my boundary. Like, I don't, cause it's my boundary. So, it's my life. Like, nobody else gets to vote on it. I'm going to do what I need to do to keep myself safe and sane. There's no like I said, there's no shortage of, like, well-intended bad advice. There's no shortage of opinions out there. This is where it comes down to knowing yourself well enough that you could have a whole room full of people that are disagreeing with you, and you're still okay enough with yourself to be like, well, okay, that's your perspective, that's your opinion, but I'm gonna go do what I'm gonna do, and you don't get to vote. So, but it can take a while to kind of get to that place. Let's see. Let me see. I have a couple of questions. Somebody had mentioned this in the support group, which I've only ever come across this one other time, and I did not make the connection until he brought this up in the support group. But he'd asked about sleep paralysis after an abusive relationship, that he has been experiencing sleep paralysis, and it's it's obviously absolutely terrifying. So he was kind of wanting to know, could this be related to some sort of like PTSD type response? And I had never thought about this before. So I did some quick research on it, and I came across a study in 2005 that looked at rates of sleep paralysis in Cambodian refugees. And they found that traumatic life events can increase the likelihood of experiencing sleep paralysis. So, in their study, out of 100 refugees, 49 had suffered at least one sleep paralysis attack in the past 12 months prior to the study. Those who had been given a clinical diagnosis of PTSD showed higher sleep paralysis prevalences than those who had not been given a diagnosis. So, of the group that had PTSD, 65% of them had suffered at least an attack 12 months prior to the study. Those that didn't have PTSD, rates of sleep paralysis were around 15%. They also found a positive correlation between the severity of PTSD and number of sleep paralysis attacks. So, and then they said this could also indicate that while traumatic events may increase the risk of sleep paralysis, a sleep paralysis attack can be a traumatic event in and of itself. So it can be, it is, and it's a terrifying thing if you wake up and your body you can't move, like you are paralyzed, and it's like your brain's trying to wake up, but you can't do anything. So interesting that kind of, like I said, I had never heard that before. The only other experience that I've ever come across like that, there was a gal when I was working at a domestic violence shelter. This was years ago. She had gone through, her whole life had been intense trauma. I mean, across the board, starting at a very young age. And, she also had a history of like drug addiction and alcoholism and all these different things, most likely probably trying to cope with a lot of the trauma that she had gone through. She'd gotten out of this really scary, abusive situation. She was staying at the shelter, and she had bouts of absolute, like, awful, really vivid night terrors and sleep paralysis. And it was just awful. She was going to different sleep clinics trying to find out what was wrong with her. She was taking medication for her nightmares, and just nothing seemed to help. And it was heart-wrenching to watch somebody go through stuff like that, because here was this woman, I was, gosh, I don't know, like 32 or so at the time. She was probably in her late 40s. She was a tough cookie. I mean, she had been through a lot of stuff, and she was, really into like motorcycles. Like she was a tough chick. And so seeing this woman at night, she would just start screaming. And, the first couple times this happened, would go running upstairs, like, because it sounded like something really bad was going on. Go running upstairs, and here's this woman who looks like an absolutely terrified little kid, and she's shaking and she's crying, and she just can't. She is so scared, and like jumping in, like, into my lap, into my arms, just needing just terrified, and I had never seen anybody that have, because during the day she was fine. Like she could laugh, she could joke, she had good eye contact. She seemed to be handling things as well as a person could. But at night, it was just all of this stuff would come out, and it was awful. And not only with that, but then when she was leaving the shelter, obviously part of her issue was, and this is, I think, in a large part why she kept having this pattern of getting tangled up with all of the wrong men. In large part, she was terrified to be alone because this was going on at night. So she would call, this went on for months. She would call our shelter in the middle of the night because she would have a nightmare and she just wanted to talk to somebody in the middle of the night. And she didn't even care about what. I mean, it was just, so trauma does funny stuff to people. And thankfully, a lot of this stuff does settle down with time. It's our body's way, it's our brain's way of trying to process what we went through. And so, I guess I would try to just be patient with yourself. I know it's terrifying when you're experiencing the sleep paralysis, or for those of you that are having the night terrors, to go through something like that. But, during the day, you can try kind of tapping into those emotions and those feelings as you're comfortable. So maybe journaling or EFT therapy can be good. EMDR, those are two therapies that seem to show a lot of promising results for people that have undergone trauma. There's meditation, a lot of meditation videos and like guided imagery and those kinds of things on YouTube, which are free and that can help a person to just relax, like just kind of like just relax and process kind of the day. And it's a nice way to just end the day where you're just kind of transitioning over into this state of relaxation. So, just really utilizing all of the different resources out there. But so, yeah, interesting stuff. Like I said, had no idea that was a thing correlated to PTSD. Another question that I got that I thought was worth addressing, 'cause it was I'd never thought of it this way, but it's a really great question. Somebody had said they were getting a lot of flack from people because they had gone no contact. And they had said, basically silent treatment and no contact is the same thing, that both of those are really problematic behavior. So I wanted to address that, but let me take a sip here. Hold on. So I think when a lot of people that haven't gone through something like this, when they hear the phrase no contact, or to them it might sound really harsh, or it might even seem like a ghosting, if you're familiar with that term, where that's just where a person just ups and leaves out of the clear blue. These are not the same things, even though the result is you're not having contact with the person. The reasons why are very different. So silent treatment is a grooming behavior. Silent treatment is done to say, I'm really unhappy with whatever you did, and so now, to punish you, I'm just not going to talk to you. And I will decide when I will grace you with reopening contact. And of course, the person that's on the receiving end of that, if you're getting silent treatment, you're left twisting in the wind because it's incredibly traumatic and frustrating and crazy making to have your partner just completely withhold all communication, all affection, all attention, all of that. So silent treatment is a grooming behavior. It teaches a person what to not do. And in the case of a narcissist or an emotional manipulator of any kind, it's basically don't ever challenge me and don't ever bring up any of my problematic behavior, or you're going to get ignored, right? No contact is survival. So no contact is something that's done. No contact is an appropriate response to inappropriate behavior. That's the difference. So no contact is this person is somehow dysfunctional, dangerous, or destructive. I can't be around this. This is causing me harm, either sanity-wise or safety-wise or both. I can't be around this. So I need to just cut off contact with this person because it's sinking me. This is a one-sided relationship where I'm giving, they're taking, and it's pulling me under, and I can't do it. So, survival mechanism. Ghosting is another form of, I don't know if I'd say it's necessarily like a grooming technique, but I think if anything, it just kind of shows the lack of emotional investment that they have, that an emotional manipulator has in somebody. So when they've gotten supply, when they've gotten whatever they're trying to use another person for, the ghosting is like, okay, I've gotten what I want, and either because I want to provoke or evoke an emotion from you, like panic or jealousy or insecurity or rage or kind of what have you, they just up and disappear. So it's not necessarily grooming, it's just but it's still problematic. Let's see. Somebody else had asked, and we kind of covered this earlier, but I'll cover it again here real quick. She said, I watched videos during the day. I read all about like narcissism and all of this. And I see like all the problematic behavior within our relationship and within him. But then when he's gone, but then when he comes home, I slip back into being okay with things. Like, what's wrong with me? And what's wrong is cognitive dissonance. And so this goes back to having this emotional investment in something. So it's hard if we don't really want to leave a situation, then we're going to justify and try to normalize what we're experiencing. This is this whole thing with like hope dies last, because it really, really does. And it's amazing how long people can hold on to hope for, and how many chances they can give to somebody, and how crazy and problematic and toxic and draining a situation has to be in order for them to finally jump ship. And again, there's just so many different dynamics at play, because it's easy for a person who's not emotionally invested in that relationship, or even financially invested, right? Because if you're married, it's not as easy as just like up and leaving. Like you've got to untangle, you've got a whole life together that you have to untangle. So that takes some doing. And but when a person's having that cognitive dissonance, they try to normalize what they're experiencing. And like I was saying, it's really wild how bad things sometimes can get for a person before they actually do leave. And I would just encourage you to, this is all about you. This is you finding the right answer for you and trying to figure out what is deal breaker stuff for you, and what, kind of where your husband is with all of this, and is there any communication whatsoever that's possible. And I would just get really clear in your own mind as far as kind of what's your line in the sand, and how long are you willing time and energy and money to put into whatever you're doing before you're okay with walking away. And again, this is a very individual thing. So it's going to be a lot easier for some people to walk away than other people. So but yeah, it's not you. You're not crazy. It's cognitive dissonance. It comes from having an emotional investment, and it sets in like a fog and it clears out like a fog. And it's crazy making when we're going through all that. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to talk a little bit about excuses. So somebody was saying the other day, their husband, they had caught him cheating twice. And it wasn't just cheating, which is bad enough in and of itself, but it was having two big, like long-lasting affairs. So this wasn't just this wasn't, again, not that that would make it any better, but it wasn't like a fling. It was kind of this ongoing relationship that he had had. And he also has a pattern of, he's an alcoholic. He's, mismanaging funds. Like here, this gal she's continually, she's losing sleep over trying to budget and trying to make sure that they've got, money and enough money in savings. And he just doesn't care. So he'll go out and rack up credit card debt, and then he'll apologize for it, and he'll take out, he'll spend money on what he wants. This is, oh my gosh, I've experienced this. This is so crazy making, where he'll give her gifts that he wants. So it's like, hey, I got you, we're going to go to this baseball game for your birthday. And she doesn't even like baseball. So he wants to go to the baseball game. So he's buying her tickets for his birthday, or buying himself tickets really for her birthday, stuff like that. So this last time, so she caught him cheating, and he had given the excuse that things had really been bad in their relationship for a long time. Of course, this is the first she's heard of it, right? She had no idea that things were bad. And of course, he's blaming her. He didn't know how he could talk to her about these things. And so he was afraid that if he brought up any issues, that she would leave. And so, which is ridiculous, right? So like, we can all see that this is a manipulation because we're not emotionally invested in it. So, and it goes, it's just on and on and on, like ridiculous behavior, right? So, it got me thinking. So now here's what really upsets me about this. So what really gets me is, so now she's believing this excuse that he's just not comfortable communicating with her. So now they're in therapy and they're like, quote unquote, working through these issues. But because now he's been able to shift his bad behavior into a couple's issue. So now his cheating really isn't the focus. Now the focus is on their communication and how he's made himself into like this scared little boy of like, oh, I was so unhappy. I just couldn't talk to you about it because I was afraid you would leave. And of course, her reaction is, why would I leave you? Because we've already been through so much together. But really, of course, it's not that they've been through so much together. It's that he's put her through so much. There's a big difference there. So now they're all playing he's got the therapist wrapped around his finger. He's got her wrapped around his finger. Now she's turning herself inside out, trying to be a better wife, trying to be more understanding. They just went away for this romantic weekend. And here I am thinking to myself, you have got to be freaking kidding me. So he was able to not only get out of any consequences for his reaction or his reaction for his behavior, but he was able to blame her. And in turn, now she's walking on eggshells. Now she's on her best behavior, trying to save her marriage because somehow her actions caused him to cheat. Wild stuff. That kind of stuff just makes me really angry. And it makes me angry that she's now stuck in this crazy making Twilight Zone where he's manipulated the therapist. And now, like, how long is that going to go on? It's probably going to go on until she catches him doing something else, at which point it's going to be yet another excuse. So this brings me back to the original point here of excuses. Somebody always can have an excuse for anything that they do, right? Like if I were to take a cup of coffee and throw it at a person and they'd be like, oh my gosh, why did you do that? I could say, oh, I'm sorry. I was just really angry. I was having a bad day. Okay. That doesn't make what you did okay, right? There's still like, that's not okay. Or if I were to say, well, the cup was just too hot. I couldn't hold it anymore. Okay. But it doesn't make it okay that you threw a cup of hot coffee at me, right? It's the same thing with cheating. Like a person can use any number of excuses for their behavior. They can say, oh, well, you were working too much, or you had gained weight, or you had lost weight, or you dressed too sexy, or you didn't dress sexy enough, or this woman threw herself at me, or we weren't spending enough time together, or that none of that excuses the behavior. Like a person cheats because they wanted to cheat, period. Another person's behavior doesn't drive them to it, especially if they've never mentioned anything about it before. So if they've never said, hey, I've got these issues in our relationship, even though I've never mentioned anything before, but I'm going to go ahead and cheat, and then I'm going to feel justified in that because I had these issues. Like that's just, it's ridiculous. Like that's manipulation at its worst is what that is. So in the other part to that with excuses is excuses can always be believable because oftentimes there's a kernel of truth to all of it. It's a kernel of truth wrapped in a big ball of a lie. And it's when you're dealing with a person who lies, you're dealing with a liar. So it's a really good idea to not trust anything that they have to say, especially anything they have to say about their bad behavior. So I think it's safe to assume that whatever you have found out about is just the tip of the iceberg. But again, like and I've been there too. Like it's amazing the stuff that we can justify to ourselves, like squirrely behavior that we can justify. Somebody deletes their browsing history online and they say, "Oh, well, I just like to keep that stuff cleaned up." No. People don't just randomly delete their you do when you clear your cache, but not if you know what I mean? Like most people don't delete their browsing history if they know you're looking at it or they've done something bad. People that have nothing to hide nothing. They don't delete email accounts. They don't, periodically they don't hide their phone. They don't they don't have squirrely behavior. Like that's not normal to have squirrely behavior. So, but again, it's amazing the stuff that we can justify to ourselves. And yeah, it's just an exercise. It's an exercise in crazy making. It's an exercise in making yourself nuts is what it is. Trying to convince yourself that you can trust an untrustworthy person is what it boils down to. So let's see, what else do we have here? Let me scroll through these questions. Little Miss says, yeah, but why would you check the browsing history? Yeah, I was thinking that as I was saying it out loud. I wouldn't, right? So again, normal people don't normally feel the need to check their partner's browsing history either. So if a person's feeling like they have to play detective, I would have to wonder what's going on there that you're feeling that you have to play detective. Like, does your partner have a bunch of squirrely behavior that you're trying to make sense out of? Because if their behavior is turning you into having to play detective, you're in the wrong relationship because there's no trust there. It's just seriously, save yourself the time. It's that kind of stuff just grinds a person down over time. It's exhausting. So, but Jack had told me that after I'd found out that he had ads on, he's looking for sex on Craigslist and Plenty of Fish, and he was on Match.com. He was on, those are the three that I remember. Or at least those were the three that I checked. I don't even know if I checked any other ones at that point. And he knew that I knew some stuff, and he was doing damage control. So that's why he was deleting all of his browsing history, because he knew I was at the time tech savvy enough to kind of start piecing things together. I'd gotten into his Facebook account, I'd gotten into his email, and I'm thankful for that, because that was really the validation that I needed of, oh, okay, this is what's really going on here. So Recovering Soul says, Dana, do narcissists keep trophies like serial killers do? Do they keep mementos of past conquests? You know, I'm sure some do, some don't. I've heard this from several people before that theirs did, and not only did they, but that they did. They kept really strange things like locks of their hair, or one person had kept, I think, like their urine, which I had never. That was a first. I'd never heard that before. Oh, and I had said that when I had first heard that, it had reminded me of something. Jack, I think, he was really big into photography, and he had taken a lot of nude photos. I think probably every person he'd ever been with. But they weren't trashy. They were very like artistically done. They were beautiful photos. But I remember that. I'm like, this guy here, he has like he's all of these pictures of all of these different women. And that was, it was kind of strange. I don't know. So, let's see. Let me scroll up. There was another gal today on the support group. This was I guess somewhat of a new thing. I hadn't come across this so much in with like narcissism. So this was, I don't know, I'll be curious to see if you guys have come across this. So she was talking, I'll kind of stay vague because I didn't talk to her about mentioning what was going on in the live stream. But kind of in a nutshell, hold on, let me think about how I can change this around to keep details private. He had I think, like, okay, we'll say like a soccer team that he was a big fan of. And she was not a fan. And they had gotten in a fight, or something had happened between them, and his team lost. And he began blaming her for the loss of their game. And she was like, everything that goes wrong in his life is blamed on her. Which I'm used to narcissists blaming other people for their stuff, but that was kind of into the territory of like magical thinking. Like that, I had not really experienced that before. So, interesting stuff. Zakira asks, wait, hold on a second. Asks, what really is narcissism? So, kind of like at the core, it's it's like a false self. So, I don't know if you were on the stream earlier, but we were talking about there's kind of this spectrum, right? So you have, on one side, you have codependency, and then in the middle, you have kind of this, we'll call it like our authentic self, a true self, authentic self, right? And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have like a false self. This is the way that I think it's easiest to kind of understand. So just kind of my take on it. So you have with narcissism, if a person undergoes kind of emotional abuse or neglect or abandonment, or even physical abuse or neglect or abandonment as a child, then anything that's going to cause them to not have like proper development of like their authentic self, it's going to go one of two ways. So either they're going to have this overinflated false self. So it's kind of this defense mechanism of grandiosity, superiority. It's just kind of pure ego. And it's very much that fight defense of it's me versus you. Like, look at, I'm the best and there's nobody better than me. And they're just so over the top. But really, it's a lot of insecurity because there's not a true self there. Because people that have a solid sense of self, they don't need to prove themselves. They don't need to go around letting other people know, look at how important I am. Look at how superior I am. They don't go around needing to like grind other people down in order to feel good about themselves. Then on the other side of that spectrum is codependency. And so here you have narcissism, right? They have this false self. So they have this like overdeveloped false self. Codependency, it's the opposite. So you have this like loss of development of self. So a codependent person oftentimes feels like, I don't know who I am. They don't really have like a true sense of self because they weren't allowed, or their environment didn't allow them to actually develop a true sense of self. Generally because they had some sort of narcissistic parent for whatever reason. Either the parent had a personality disorder, or the parent was depressed, the parent was mentally ill, or was an addict or an alcoholic or even a workaholic. Like if they didn't have this healthy emotional bond with their parent for whatever reason, they weren't able to have that proper emotional development where kind of their needs and their wants were met, where they were encouraged and they felt safe to kind of explore and to make mistakes and to learn and to grow and to have like their gifts and abilities like nurtured and valued. And obviously, like, and probably everybody that's watching this is like, well, who has that, right? Because most people don't. And the reality is, yeah, most people don't. Like the vast majority of people out there, we're a lot of us are very damaged people. Whether or not our parents, it was intentional or unintentional, we all go through stuff, and we all tend to have these wounds. It's kind of whether or not we're aware of them and what we can do to address them and resolve them. That's the thing. So, but yeah, there's kind of this misconception about narcissism that, narcissists, that it's possibly even a good thing, or that they're just really grandiose, and I've talked about this before. I just really don't like that characteristic being a trait for narcissism, because a lot of narcissists aren't grandiose, A, and then B, grandiosity can also go with different mental illnesses, and then C, to me it's not what's really important. Like what's really important is that need for power and control. Whether or not they're grandiose, that doesn't matter. It's that need for power and control and how they respond in reaction to other people. So, but when people think about narcissists, they tend to, especially now with the elections coming up, they're like, oh, it's Donald Trump. Oh, he's a narcissist. But that can be misconstrued, or people are like, oh, well, but this is a good thing because he's a real go-getter. And so they're, but it's like, well, yeah, to a point. And there's kind of what we were talking about earlier. So there's this like spectrum of narcissism, frankly, just like I think there's a spectrum of codependency, although I don't know if that's even a thing. It might be just a thing that I'm making up. But to me, that makes sense that there's a spectrum of both. But with healthy narcissism, it's, here again, like you have like this true self, right? This true, healthy, happy, well-adjusted self. And healthy narcissism on that scale is just a little bit there. It's enough that gets us out of bed in the morning and we have, goals and plans and a vision. And we're like, I can do this. And these are my dreams. And I'm going to dream big. And why not now? And why not me? And, we can believe in ourselves and we can do great things. But it's when problematic narcissism comes in is when it's, that me versus you mentality. It's that attitude of competition, and where it's got to be all about, like, for the narcissist, it's like, well, it's got to be not only about me, but at the expense of you. So the other person's not allowed to have thoughts or feelings or opinions or anything that disagrees with the narcissist, because that narcissist is constantly in that fight mode of, I have to be right, so that means you have to be wrong. So either you agree with me completely, or you're either not in my life, or you're starved out, or you're abused until you do get in line, and until you do either do things my way, or I've ground you down so much that you just no longer exist. So, okay, let's see. Madeline, great question. She says, are all narcissists inherently codependent to some degree? So that's, yes. And Elise was saying that she had the same question. I've wondered this too. And I think it's tricky because I think it's a semantics problem with the word codependency. And it's interesting because okay, so let me just back up a little bit. So the whole concept of codependency is fairly new. And so I think it's still, that ball, it was still in motion. And there's still a lot of understanding and kind of, it's still kind of all being sorted out. So everything that's out there as far as codependency goes really has been more of like a grassroots effort and a grassroots of understanding. So, at first it was, the spouses of alcoholics. They were originally called co-alcoholics. And then researchers kind of got into it and they thought, okay, well, no, it's more like, no, there's codependency going on here. Like they're dependent upon this person basically staying sick. Like they need them to be alcoholics. And there's kind of just this very, very unhealthy dynamic that's going on here. And so there's a lot of like overlap between like dependency and codependency. And those words are often used interchangeably. And frankly, again, it's interesting, but I think it's kind of like a semantics game. I think that there's a lot of both going on there. But then kind of the evolution of the term moved from not just alcoholics, but it moved to like addicts as well. And then kind of like, okay, now fast forward to, let's say, like the 80s and 90s, because 70s, 60s, 70s it was alcoholism. Then it kind of progressed to 80s. You had a lot of cocaine use and drug use, and then it was okay, well, then now it's addicts. And then the 90s and the early 2000s, it was people were realizing, oh my gosh, no, I didn't grow up in a home that had alcoholism or addiction, but you're describing me as well. So what's going on here? So this term is still kind of in this evolution. A lot of people tend to divide up, it's kind of an either or. So like either you are a narcissist or you are a codependent. And so that can be kind of confusing. Like either you're on this team or you're on this team, right? But if you think about it, to me, it's narcissists tend to really be the quintessential codependents, because they are very much reliant on their partner, needing them. Like to them, it's like this parasitic dynamic, because they have to use other people. They drain supply from other people, whether that's, money, sex, social status, public image, validation, kind of what have you. So they're continually draining other people and then they just like a vampire, like they drain their victim and then they toss them aside and they go latch on to the next one. So to me, in that context, yes, it's very much codependent. However, a lot of people kind of understand codependency in more of the terms of being, clingy or trying to forever fix the other person, or this kind of unbridled degrees of caring and compassion to where it's problematic. So it's a big term, and there's a lot of kind of different ways that you could look at it. But the dynamic, I think you could say, is very much a codependent or maybe a dependent. Maybe that's an easier way to kind of separate out the two. It's a dependent dynamic between a narcissist and a codependent. And then there's some other words that are kind of thrown around in that. So you have like independent, and then you have interdependent type dynamics. So I don't know. There's interesting, all these different ways to look at it, However, so let me kind of back up to the question. So she was saying, so Elise was saying that her narc had admitted to some codependency. I have encountered this as well. So I dated a guy briefly who had grown up, he had an abusive childhood, and he had said the same thing. He's like, had his dynamic with his father. It was his father, basically his father was more problem. He like out narcissisted him. His father was even more problematic. And so when he was around his father, he had no voice. So their dynamic was one of him walking on eggshells, him having to be quiet, him not having power and control over the situation, and feeling very codependent, having to go to great lengths to try to make things work. But then how he was with me, and I'm sure how is with every other woman he's dated, is then he was the bully, right? And so, yeah, I think that's how, really, that's how bullies are formed, right? So it's like kids that become abusive generally are being abused. Like that's how that happens. Like that tends to not just be a coincidence. So I could see how they might say, yeah, I've got, I was abused as a child. And that's another thing. So like a lot of people, and again, like I had thought this too for a while, people tend to sort people into categories of, okay, either you were an abuser or you were a victim of abuse, not realizing that people can be in more than one category. So like, just like I was saying, you have an abusive parent who is abusing their child, and the child then goes and grows up and abuses his wife or a kid at school or what have you, right? So they can be both. And they generally are both. So if, again, that's the whole hurt people. But still, even though a person's gone through abuse, they went through trauma as a child, they probably did go through a lot. It doesn't make their behavior okay. And it doesn't mean that we can fix them or change them, and there's a term too, another term for codependence that's called an inverted narcissist. And it's kind of the idea that we think so highly of ourselves that we think that we have the power to be able to help and change other people. So again, like a lot of terms around all this. And it's, again, you have to kind of like, I think, hold on to what helps and let the rest go. I definitely was not a fan of the term inverted narcissist. I can see where it might have some merit, but I don't even like being associated remotely with a person who's abusive or even like abusive behavior. Like to me, that just feels really, it just doesn't feel good. So, Let's see. Let me scroll up here. Yes, that's Elisa saying, and I kind of missed the part of the conversation, but the type of narcissist, the altruistic narcissist who's trying to look good to everyone. Yeah, I mean, oftentimes that's kind of falls under the umbrella of like the covert abuser, but yes, I like that, the altruistic one. You know, my grandfather would be would have fallen under that category. So, here he was like doing all of this, like he was a minister and doing mission work and just volunteering, and he just seemed like such a great guy. He was incredibly charming, he was funny, he was handsome, he was all of these things. And again, of course, like I can only, I just, it makes me so sad. Like I can only imagine the crazy making that my grandmother must have gone through, because here she had grown up, in a very religious home, very sheltered, and like the rest of us, probably thought, well, I could see a problematic person coming a mile away. And here was this man who really seemed to have a deep faith, a shared faith with her. And he was a minister, and he just had professed to have all of these really great qualities, but yet he lied and cheated and mishandled money and manipulated and was incredibly emotionally abusive and blamed her for all of his behavior, and on and on and on. And it's crazy making, because that kind of level of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of behavior, to that degree, other people not like, they really don't see it. They really don't see it. So all they see is like, oh, this person's so charming and sincere, and so it must be you, right? So that it does, like, there's really no support or understanding for people that are in a relationship with an altruistic narcissist. Awful. So Elisa's saying too that her ex had also said he had no voice as a child. Yeah, and too, part of me, because they lie, right? A lot of them like are compulsive, pathological liars. I don't know about you, but I know in my situation, when I got out of it, I started questioning how much was even true, because he had lied about a bunch of stuff that just didn't matter at all. And so I do believe that. Well, I don't know. I don't really know what I believe, because I think he said a lot of things that were lies. So part of me thinks sometimes that they'll use stories as a way of manipulating. So like manipulating with the kind of, this out of pity, out of guilt, out of, trying to get us to take care of them. Like, nobody understands me like you do. And you are so emotionally balanced, and I've just never met anybody that communicates like you, and I feel so safe around you, and I grew up in this really scary bad childhood, and so all of that can really kind of weave a web around a person to where they feel guilty about leaving. So let's see. Clock 99 says, Dana, why is it that so many therapists and clinicians know absolutely nothing about narcissism? Well, I think that they do. They do know about narcissism, but more in terms of narcissistic personality disorder. But I do think that there's a big gap in the knowledge, because yes, while it's one thing to be able to say, it's sort of like understanding an alcoholic, right? And kind of what alcoholism is or what addiction is and how it progresses and traits of an addict, those kinds of things. But to not understand the impact that alcoholism has on the spouse is like really missing a big chunk of the puzzle. And so that's kind of what I see is missing. And I think there's a lot of the information that's that I've come across from a lot of people that I've even talked to. Like I have an acquaintance of mine. I work with her. She's a therapist. She was married to a sociopath, and he had again, like, and this is we like you would think that in our field, because we work with we work with people that are like persistently and chronically either mentally ill or personality disordered. So this is the only thing that we work with. Like, we do not work with people that, don't have those issues. So this is 800 clients as our caseload. So this is all we do. For her, so she was married to a guy who's a sociopath. She was experiencing problematic behavior. He actually went to go get a security clearance, and they did a psychiatric evaluation on him for the security clearance, and it came back as antisocial personality disorder. And she saw the piece of paper in the car, and it was that moment of clarity for her, like, oh, yep, okay, it's not just me. Because that's the thing, like, when all of us, when we're emotionally invested in a situation, we don't see it clearly. And so for her, I'm sure, working with this population day in and day out, I'm sure she was probably, because I've done it too, telling yourself, well, maybe I'm diagnosing, this person, maybe I'm around it too much, maybe I'm reading stuff in, maybe I'm like kind of being hypervigilant about what I'm really experiencing. And because, this guy was really charming. He didn't have like a criminal history. So she was just focusing on the stuff that she wanted to focus on. It was interesting though. So she had obviously been narcissistically abused by him, right? So, but she wasn't able to identify what was going on with her. And it was interesting kind of talking about all of this and then talking to her about like the terminology and she just was like, I didn't know. 'Cause again, it's one thing to study it. It's another thing to actually live it. Sort of like you could go to school for, you could get a PhD in, I don't know, exercise science. You can read about body mechanics all day long, but it's one thing to study about how to best run a marathon. It's another thing to actually run a marathon. So it's kind of the same thing with abuse. So I think there is information out there about like emotional abuse, physical abuse, domestic violence. From what I've experienced from the training that I've had, as well as talking to friends of mine that are therapists and the training that they've had, it's more talked about in a way of like physical abuse, domestic violence, the power and control wheel, which frankly, without examples of it, without bringing it down to like a daily thing and talking about this is what narcissistic abuse is, and this is what it feels like, and this is what a person goes through, and just all of it. Like, this is bad advice that people are giving, and or like well-intended bad advice. Like, this is really great advice if you're not dealing with an emotional manipulator, right? Like true love conquers all, and you can get through it, and it's all about commitment and all of that. Like, all of like forgiveness is important. Like, all of those kind of idioms and cliches are great if you're dealing with a normal person, normal healthy person who's solutions oriented. But that's toxic thinking if you're dealing with an emotional manipulator, and it can get a person into deep trouble. So there just isn't. I think it's just kind of connecting the dots. I know, again, like I know for me, I've had hundreds of hours of training that was specifically around domestic violence and abuse. And most therapists don't have that. So I've had like intensive training just in this, like in crisis response and personality stuff and trauma and the effects of all of this. And the training that I had, it was never discussed as far as narcissists. Like the personality disordered piece was never mentioned, not once. And I remember going through doing these kind of my own journey through understanding this and then really realizing, oh my gosh, we like giant chunks of knowledge were not, they weren't even brought up or discussed. And realizing when we're talking about domestic violence and abusive people, we're talking about narcissists, and how validating, how much clarity that would give a person to realize this is like a personality disorder stuff. This is not a person who's solutions oriented, who's team oriented. Like this person has a totally different take on reality. So that's kind of like the starting piece of all that to figure out, because it's one thing to know, like, yeah, power and control, abusive people are all about power and control. But if a person can't tell, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? And what are the effects on the people around that person who's getting power and control over them? Then they're not accurately assessing the situation. If they're not accurately assessing the situation, then they're not going to be able to accurately treat the situation. So this is why I'm a huge fan of support groups of people that have been there, done that. I'm really, by and large, not a fan of individual therapy because the risk of running into a lot of well-intended bad advice is really, really high. So I would encourage people to, if you want to do individual therapy, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it, but I think it's important to be in a support group as well. So that way you can discuss, this is kind of what, my therapist was saying, or how does this feel? Because if you've got a person that's been through an abusive relationship, odds are they don't trust their judgment and they are making a lot of these assumptions that this clinician is completely fully educated and skilled in this area and is going to be able to guide them they're going to be able to actually help them, not realizing that therapists are people too. And so, some of them are personality disordered as well, or addicts or alcoholics or abusive or kind of what have you. They're people too. So if a person can't tell kind of good advice from bad advice, and if they get tangled up with, if their only lifeline is one therapist, and that therapist may or may not have a good grip on the situation, because again, there's good and bad, there's kind of that range in all professions, no matter what it is. So but it's hard to tell, because it's a very isolating thing. Like you're alone, one-on-one, with a therapist. But if most people, if you're at a healthy place, you realize, okay, it's important for me to have a rapport with them. It's important for me to feel heard and validated, and that I can open up to them, and that I feel safe here. But to a survivor of narcissistic abuse, all of that kind of like more basic stuff isn't present, because they have a lot of that PTSD stuff going on. Plus, they've lived in an absolutely crazy making twilight zone for however long. So it just, I don't know. I think support groups are good because to me, it's safer. You're getting a lot of feedback and insight from people that have been there, done that. And so that this way, if somebody is giving well-intended bad advice, odds are other members of the support group, because it's a group, they're going to be able to point out, hey, you know what? Like this is kind of off, or I don't know how great that is, or whatever. So I guess what I'm saying is I think support groups can give a person a lot of clarity as to what's going on and a lot of validation, and they can be there to support a person on a more regular basis, whereas individual therapy, I think, can be really great after you've already gotten the clarity and the validation from a group, to then realize, okay, these are the issues that I have that I need to work on. Knowing that, I'm going to go find a therapist that I feel comfortable with, that I have a good rapport with, and I'm going to go dig deeper into these specific issues. So does that make sense? Like, I think that would be like a better way to handle that. Because, and then again, like a session with a therapist, it's like 1 hour a week. So when you've gone through something traumatic, you generally need a lot more support than just 1 hour a week. And that's kind of the benefit of the support group. And then two, it's nice to be able, because I'm sure it can, if you haven't been there, done that, even if you have, it can wear a person out if a person's in that stage of trying to understand what they went through, because they've been so manipulated and they've been in that fog of cognitive dissonance for so long that they're feeling that need to like rehash and pull apart everything that they went through moment by moment. And I think, again, like if you haven't been there, done that, that's absolutely exhausting and crazy making. And I'm sure frustrating for a lot of clinicians, because they're like, okay, like we kind of need to move forward. Like, let's talk more about you. But if a person's trying to process this trauma, that's a very valid stage of that rehashing and understanding. So there's just, like I said, like there's just a lot of components at play. But so that a person can go and they can rehash and try to make sense of everything in a support group. And then again, like the clarity that they get in the support group, then they can go take back to their therapist and say, these are the aha moments I have. Can we explore these deeper, or what do you think about this, or what have you? So yeah, Postmodern was saying, my therapist is tough. She tells me, just like Al-Anon does, to put the focus on myself. And she's not into labeling my behavior or his behavior, whoever he is, as I have several he's in my life. And this kind of goes back to what's working for you. And because that's the other thing too. So like different therapists are going to have different approaches. Like some of them are going to be really no nonsense, and some of them might be, they're just, because they're people. So they have like they bring their own personality to the table in all of this. And so some people, depending on like the level of trauma and where they are with things, they might need a much softer approach, and they might just need to talk about, to rehash things. And some people might need to have more tough love and say, you know what, we're done. Like we need to focus on you and whatever. So like one approach could really work for one person, but it could feel absolutely re-victimizing to another. So it's just kind of, again, like kind of what's working for you at this point in your healing and understanding. Yeah, I like that. She says she's not into diagnostics. She's more like, is this working for you? If no, then let's find something that does. My therapist specialized in trauma, which really benefited me. Yeah. So it's, yeah, I kind of go back and forth with like labels and diagnostic stuff, because that, it does give people a lot of validation, but then people can kind of get hung up on it. So it's just kind of, I think what helps is to, and this was a thing at the shelter that I noticed, is to kind of mirror back a person's understanding and comfort level of something. So for example, like when I was at the shelter, we had this whole, hold on, I gotta readjust here. We had this whole intake process that we had to go through. And the terminology was very much like, okay, you're abuser, right? You're a victim. And so right away, just those words would cause some people were fine with them. They were like, yes, I was abused. He's my abuser. I am a victim. This is what's going on. Other people were like, I don't know if I'd call it abuse. Like they weren't comfortable calling it abuse because they could still tolerate it, is really what it boiled down to. Even if they'd been beaten up and had broken bones and what have you, as long as they could still tolerate it, to them it wasn't abuse. But it's, every person's understanding is comfortable. But if that was the barrier to healing and understanding, was the word abuser, then it was sort of like, okay, you know what? Like, you tell me, like, what word are you comfortable with? And then we'll just go with that terminology. So if you want to call him your ex or your boyfriend or, jerk, then that's what we'll go with. Because once people start getting defensive about things, then it's all over. Like that rapport is broken and their understanding isn't made because now they're defensive. So, it can be hard. A good therapist, like any other professional in any field, a good one is worth their weight in gold. And, but a bad one can do a tremendous amount of harm and cost a person a lot of time and energy and money and all kinds of stuff. So, I guess it just kind of, again, like look at what results are you getting? And are those the kind of results that you're needing? And if not, then it might be, in your best interest to call around and to talk to a couple other therapists, because it is important to have that rapport and to feel believed and validated and safe, and that this person, is hearing you and understanding you and is able to kind of be that sounding board for you as you're exploring all of this, because this is a lot of stuff to explore. So let's see. Yeah, postmodern saying jerk. I like that. It's fun to label people in your phone. It helps, like bipolar ex-husband. Yeah, so this was the thing that we did in the support group. Gosh, it's probably been, I don't know, like a year and a half, maybe even longer than that, where people were giving, names, like alternate names. And what was really fun about that is, so like a lot of, understandably so, like there's a lot of anger and rage, right? If you've been victimized by somebody. So there was a lot of really strong language, right? This person's the devil, they're Satan, they're, this big time a-hole, like just very emotionally anger filled words. And, so I don't even know how it started, but we decided like that it's not worth I'm not going to give this person any more of my joy. Like I'm not going to allow them to steal any more of my joy. And so we began coming up with names that would make us laugh. So like jerk face was one, names that were just like silly, kind of snarky insults, little man, um, you know, uh, witchy woman, creature from the Black Lagoon. I mean, and it's funny because then, and it sounds maybe really kind of, I don't know, petty or whatever. And I guess it is, but when you see that name come up on your cell phone or in your email, it generally will make you laugh. And so it just changes the emotion that you're bringing to the situation. And so we were laughing so hard. People were coming up with just all kinds of really funny names. And it's just kind of a fun way to kind of lighten up a very heavy situation. So just something you might want to play with. Madeline says, I set his ringtone to the Darth Vader theme. Oh my gosh, that's funny. Postmodern says she likes Creature from the Black Lagoon. Yeah. Martine says, I feel like this whole time that you're holding like a crack pipe or something, I I feel like I'm a giant. It's kind of a cool feeling. Like this little tiny microphone. So, yeah, it's weird. It's so funny. Here's my normal microphone. Uh, Hold on. I gotta get it off of here. So, compare the two. Yeah, compare the two. Yeah, it's ridiculous, like how I continue to have issues with all of this. So, um, David says worst half. That was his nickname. Yeah. Sylvia says, I think humor knocks the fear out. I think it does. It does. And it helps I think, remind you of the ridiculousness of the situation. So, um, what was I going to say? No More says, Dana, I prayed for no glitches tonight. Oh, well. Oh, yes. This is my burden. Like, I was actually joking with a friend the other day. I said, have you heard the whole saying of if you really want to make God laugh, then tell him your plans? And there's so much truth to that because I had been saying for the longest time, like, there's very few things in life I know for sure, but I will never get involved in a career where I have anything to do with technology or public speaking. This is what I do. This is what I do. So, I mean, yeah, this, oh, life is funny. Who would have ever guessed? Um, let's see. Another thing, speaking of like names for people and places, is so this helped me to kind of cut through the cognitive dissonance. And so with Steve, he owed me money, and there was just a bunch of nonsense, and so he was emailing me, and I knew, like, I was talking with his wife. I was very clear as to what I was dealing with, and in again, like, he lived 26 hours away, so the temptation to even reconnect really was not strong because it just was like the distance thing, and he was still married, and it was just a bunch of like, obviously, like, highly problematic things there that I didn't want to get involved with. And when so he was emailing me, and I had told his wife, I said, I only feel the need to keep communication open with him because I need to get repaid. And it was just the most crazy dysfunctional situation. Hindsight being what it is, it was totally not worth my sanity to even try to recoup that money. Like, I really wish I would have just cut ties and just considered it tuition at the School of Hard Knocks and just driven on, because it was not worth it. But I was totally flat broke at the time, and I was terrified. I had no money. But anyways, so whenever he would email me, because there were times where I could kind of feel myself, that charm. It was just all of that future faking. He was saying all the right things. He was just showering me with attention. And I could feel myself kind of getting pulled back in, falling back in love with the man that I thought that he was. And I renamed, so in my emails, I created a folder for him, and then his name on my phone too was Pet Cemetery. So I talked about that. In the movie, the little boy dies. What comes back? It looks like the sweet little boy, but it's not him. Like what comes back is evil. That was very much it. I was like, this, what's come back? It looks like Steve. It's talking like Steve. It's saying all the right things, but it's not him because I know the truth. Like I know what's really going on. So this is all a manipulation. This is all a lie. This is all nonsense. So it does help too to kind of cut through that cognitive dissonance. Postmodern says, I love that term, future faking. Yeah, I do too. It's so accurate. Postmodern says, with a smiley face, tuition at the School of Hard Knocks. Yes. And you know what? Frankly, it's some of the best money that a person will ever spend. I can't tell you how much money I threw away on college classes that I learned like next to nothing on. But oftentimes it's those painful life lessons that cost you money or time or what have you, where, no, you don't want to like repeat it, but it's one of those things. It's like, you know what, I just almost needed that to happen because I don't think I would have learned any other way. Like it needed to hurt that bad in order for me to get the point. So yeah, now that I'm emotionally detached from it, and I have stability in my life and, I'm moving forward, I can look back on all of that and be like, I got so much out of that, in many ways it's exactly, and this might sound terrible. I don't mean it to be re-victimizing to anybody, but it was exactly what I needed to have happen. Because it had been happening in my life since I was a child, but it had been my normal. And so I hadn't realized that being treated in, I didn't realize what was going on, what this was problematic. So the awareness that came about from all of this has totally been worth it. But it's a freaking hard way to learn, unfortunately. But I think it's oftentimes the only way for us to learn. Because it's kind of, again, like we are our own baseline for normal. And kind of like the saying goes, the last thing the fish notices is the water. Because we're in it. We're in it every single day. And here's kind of another metaphor or I don't know what you call it, analogy to like with well-intended bad advice with a fish that involves a fish is, if a monkey a monkey plucks a fish, or a monkey's holding a fish and says, I'll help you, I'll help you, as it removes it from the lake and puts it up safely in a tree. Like that's kind of the equivalent of, I'll prevent you from drowning. So the monkey takes the fish out of the lake and puts it safely up in the tree. Like that is well-intended bad advice. That's exactly how that goes down. Coming from a good place, but yikes, not good. 100 Smiles says, Dana, one day you could be broadcast over radio networks, maybe. Yeah, maybe. That would be something. There's so much stuff that I really would like to do with all of this, and I don't know, it's gonna be exciting. Like I feel like, I've been at this for not quite, no, it's probably been about 18 months. And I feel like I'm finally, and I don't want to jinx myself, but I feel like I'm kind of finally hitting my stride. It's been incredibly overwhelming this whole time. It's been like this, not even like a learning curve. I feel like I've been either dragged by a truck or like gone through a rock tumbler. Like it's just been this really rocky ride. And one thing after another, and incredibly stressful because, obviously there's so much on the line. And and then of course, like, because I don't have it all figured out. There's a lot of my own stuff that I'm going through, and then it's been stressful. And then realizing my own issues, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want this to impact other people, and just like there's just so much. But I feel like, okay, now I've kind of got a good, at least I feel like I've got a good grip on my issues and my biases and stuff I need to work on, and I've kind of been able to sort that out from what I'm doing here, and how I would like to go about growing this, and how I would like to work towards kind of overall awareness about all of this. And so yeah, and I don't know if you were here earlier, but I was talking about wanting to start a podcast. So that's that's in the works, and that's gonna be exciting, and I'm sure that's gonna be a whole another learning curve, because that's how it is. It's it, life. So, um, what Sylvie says, I want Dana to come to Seattle to be Frasier, then I can hang out with her. That's hilarious. I am probably a lot like Frasier, a lot less like Frasier, and more like oh, who was it? Dorothy from the Golden Girls. So you might be disappointed. Or Sophia. Probably one of the two. Either maybe Dorothy. Sophia is probably a lot sassier than I am. So, let's see. Um, oh, well, thank you, Elise. She says, you're so good at answering people's questions. You will go far. There are 3 of you, Melanie, Lisa, Romano, and you. Well, thank you. That's saying a lot, because those other 2 I think are pretty awesome, and they've, and that again, like, that's the cool thing too, is with all these different speakers, is everybody has their own voice, and everybody's going to resonate with people in their own way. And it's, I don't know, I get excited. Because there's so many different people talking about this topic, that I feel like between all of us, we're going to have enough of the questions, and enough of the, and not, I mean, not just like that we have the questions, but that everybody that's asking the questions, and that, we're discussing the questions, and then we have our own questions, and then it's just this whole cycle of awareness that's happening, and aha moments, and this whole progression. It's just really, really cool to see happen. It's exciting. So, Valenta says, Dana, how do I manage the envy I have for the new supply? I understand she is not getting anything good from the narcissist, but just imagining she is getting the crumbs of affection I had makes me sad. I think what helps with that is to try to, well, we tend to be envious of things that we don't have. So if you were in a situation where you were getting attention and affection, because really it's not necessarily him that you miss, it's the crumbs, it's the affection and the attention that you miss. So if you're in a position where you're getting hopefully more than crumbs, right? So please, no more crumbs. Like, you're worth more than crumbs. We should make that into like a t-shirt or like a hashtag. No more crumbs. Like, no more crumbs. We're done, right? You deserve better than that. We all deserve better than that. But if you can get to that place where you're getting attention and affection, then you're going to find yourself not being envious of that. So it's, again, it's hard to move forward in these kinds of situations. I'm a huge fan. There's a website called meetup.com. I talk about it all the time, but I'm a huge fan of that, because it's not a dating site, and it's free. a lot of the get-togethers, the meetups, are either low cost or free, and I would encourage a person join like a dozen different groups. You don't have to go to every single thing that they do, but it's a nice way to stay busy. It's a nice way to kind of like handle and balance the pain and the stress and to kind of move forward all at the same time. Because it can be intense when you're sitting home alone and you're like, my life feels blown apart, and you don't want to leave the house and all of this stuff. Meetup it's just other people out there, generally at different transitional stages in their life, that are looking to meet other people. You can join around all kinds of different groups, different topics, and there's no pressure. You can go, you can stay for as long as you want or as little as you want, and then you can leave. So I think kind of getting that attention and social interaction really goes a long way. So yeah, you just don't need crumbs. Yeah, Elise says, yep, that's the answer. We're worth more than crumbs. We sure are. We sure are, and I think oftentimes it's proving to ourselves that we are, and just reminding ourselves, like, why not me? Like, we're enough. Like, we're enough just the way we are. Nobody's perfect. Like, everybody's got their stuff. So this idea that I think a lot of us have, that, oh, well, we'll be worth more than crumbs at some point down the road, when we have the degree, or when we lose the weight, or when we get the job, or when we kind of, get a different car or different clothes, or when we become something other than we are, then at that point we'll deserve more than crumbs. But there's always something else, and nobody deserves crumbs. That's a great way to live starved out and it's torturous way. Trisha asks, why do narcissists give less and less crumbs as time goes by? Let me take a sip here and I'll answer that. Generally because they can. So, because remember, for them, it's all about them, right? So if a person's all about them, then it's not going to be about your needs and your wants and what you need. So if they don't feel affectionate, then they're not going to give affection. If they don't feel like they want to give attention, then they're not going to give attention. And they dictate that. And if a person, they stick around for that, then there's no incentive for them to do anything other than that, because they can get by with the bare minimum and this person's still going to stay. So that's, one of the big reasons. Little Miss says, and why do we take less and less crumbs over time? Ooh, isn't that a good question? Well, I think there's probably a couple different reasons for that, but I think a lot of it has to do with we get used to surviving on crumbs, because that becomes our new normal. So if you just get used to always being starved out, you get used to your stomach growling, right? So like you have these like emotional hunger pains that are just the new state of normal. And so what a lot of us tend to do is we think, because it oftentimes it doesn't occur to us to leave for a wide variety of reasons. Maybe it's not possible for us to leave given like our religion or our culture or our, income or children or for whatever reason. So if a person, especially if they're like quote unquote stuck or they're feeling stuck, then they try to make do with crumbs. And so they try to earn their partner's love. And so that's when you see people like twisting themselves inside and out, thinking, okay, if I can just be a better wife or a husband, like I'll cook more, I'll clean more, I'll, be, give a lot more sex, will have attention and affection, and I'm just going to give and give and give in hopes of getting more than crumbs back. And of course, too, if you're going through that cycle of narcissistic abuse, where it's back to the idealized cycle where they've done something wrong, right? They've been caught lying, cheating, stealing, abusing, manipulating, what have you. Again, now it's into that idealized phase of the cycle where they're being attentive and doing all of these things and these professions of love, and they're saying, well, I'm not going to give up on us this easily, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make things work, and talk, or even actions. They're sending flowers to work, they're doing these things. It makes a person feel like there's hope. Oh, well, they have the capacity within themselves to act thoughtful and caring and giving. So that must mean that I haven't earned it yet. So I just need to try harder in order to get them to be more loving. And of course, too, this is the other crazy making thing. So that's a lot of really common relationship advice, right? That it's in a relationship, it takes two people, it's an equal give and take, and this kind of stuff, but that's not the case if you're with a narcissist or an emotional manipulator. It's not a give and take. There's not two sides to the story. There's not, your actions don't impact your partner's actions, like how it is in like a normal relationship. So, but again, like if you're neck deep in a relationship with somebody and you're in that fog of cognitive dissonance and you're emotionally invested in it, you're going to try to normalize what you're experiencing. So you're going to try to turn yourself inside and out, trying to convince yourself that it's okay, that you can survive off of crumbs. So, okay, I had, let me see, a little quote. Let me think here. What did I do with, I had all of this typed out and now I can't. Why? Okay, so I had another quote, but I'll read this one. Has to do with, it's a quote. I was looking for someone to inspire me, to motivate me, to support me, to keep me focused. Someone who would love me, cherish me, make me happy. And then I realized that all along I was looking for myself. And so that's kind of the struggle I think that a lot of us have. And this is also the difference between, because of course, a lot of those things are really good, right? But it's the difference between making a person the icing on the cake and making the person the whole cake. So if you're looking outside of yourself to feel validated, to feel loved and supported and heard and appreciated, then those are all nice things. But if you're not able to give that to yourself, then you're going to continually be starved out. It's a really hard way to live. So I would encourage you to learn to feed yourself, learn to nourish yourself, and to live, to pour all of this energy, all of this hurt and uncomfortable and unpleasant emotions into really building the best life possible, and to moving forward and in creating a great life for yourself and a great relationship with yourself. And that's how, like, that's what it's all about. I mean, that's really what it's all about. So with that said, me and my tiny microphone are going to sign off. So Lots of love to you guys. You are not alone. You are not crazy, and you really can move forward and heal from this. So take care and have a great night. I'll see you next week, every Wednesday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, my name is Dana. My website is thriveafterabuse.com. Okay, have a good week. Bye.